is destroying lives, and it is a huge criminal operation that we need to stop. And that is why I worked with Priti Patel and others on the Rwanda policy to find a safe place where people could live, where if people are entering the country illegally, we can then send those people to Rwanda. And what I would do, if I'm elected as your Prime Minister, is make the Rwanda policy work by, through the British Bill of Rights, ensuring that we can't be overruled by the ECHR. Kemi, I've worked with her as Women and Equalities Minister. You know, we've taken on a lot of the agenda of people who were trying to deny that women were women and so on. So I think she's absolutely brilliant, and I would definitely want her as part of my team if I am successful. What I want to make sure the online safety bill does is protect the under 18s from content that is damaging. And I have two daughters who are aged 13 and 16, and I worry about some of the material that they can access online. I also worry about the impact of social media on them before they are yet fully adult and fully able to take responsibility. I very strongly agree with you, though, where it's about adults being able to speak freely, they absolutely should be, and it should be the same online as offline. That's a really important principle, and I'll make sure that the online safety bill does reflect that.
Well, there we are, a bit of a flavour of what went on with that People's Forum yesterday. Well, let's discuss those comments from Liz Truss and the leadership race as a whole now with the chief political commentator at The Independent, John Rentoul. Now, John, let's start off. Liz Truss seemed fairly forceful there yesterday. She even injected a little bit of humour at points. What did you make of it?
Oh, well, I think she has performed increasingly well. She wasn't that great in the hustings in Darlington the day before. That was more Rishi Sunak's home territory, I suspect, and she was a little bit stiff and wooden then. But she seemed much more relaxed last night, and I think that was a very good test of a candidate to have to answer questions from members of the public. I thought that was quite important, and I thought she did quite well.
Yes, it was interesting having those follow-up questions, specifically the members of the public coming to and from her. There was one moment with someone who was a carer for an ill relative that was really quite poignant, and we seemed to tease something out of Liz Truss there, a commitment to overhaul the social care system, but she said she'd look at some direct help. Is there a moment here that we're seeing when Liz Truss talks about tax cuts sort of as the headline of her campaign? When we get into the detail, when we get into the questioning, sometimes she does talk in the language of handouts.
Yes, absolutely, because that's what she's going to have to do if she wins this contest, because tax cuts cannot be the whole answer to the cost of living problem. So she is going to have to use the benefit system, just as Rishi Sunak did as Chancellor. She's going to have to extend those cash payments to people on benefits and pensioners. But she wants to avoid saying so at the moment because she wants to emphasise, as you quite rightly spotted, she wants to emphasise tax cuts, and she wants to position herself as a true Conservative as opposed to handouts. But she will do handouts, and then she'll be accused of betrayal.
Although perhaps in a more limited way. One of the other interactions yesterday was with a waspy woman in the audience, and she was asking for compensation, of course, for the equalisation of those retirement ages, raising the age at which that generation of women needed to retire. Liz Truss was candid with her, saying that she's not going to promise things she can't deliver, saying that she wouldn't give her extra money. Does that show a bit of grit?
No, that's the standard answer, Tom. Rishi Sunak said exactly the same thing in Darlington, and it's what any politician will say. I mean, the waspy issue is, unfortunately for the women concerned, something that no politician wants to reopen. Jeremy Corbyn tried to at the last minute in the last general election. But then the enormous costs became obvious and helped undermine his credibility. So, no, that issue is not going to be reopened. And I don't think there's any difference between the candidates on that. I mean, Liz Truss is just as hardline in looking after the public finances as Rishi is.
Well, let's turn to some of the new things we learnt yesterday then, particularly on this issue of cabinet roles. Liz Truss specifically referenced Kemi Badenoch in terms of someone who she would want, in her words, in her top team. Kemi Badenoch's not endorsed any candidates so far in this race. Might we expect something?
It's funny, isn't it, how Kemi Badenoch is the sort of darling of a section of the Conservative membership. In a way that Michael Gove, who also hasn't declared yet, is not, and the two candidates are both trying to attract her support. But I don't think she's going to declare for either of them. But she has, through this leadership campaign and through her good showing, secured a place in the cabinet. Whoever wins, I suspect.
I wonder, what is your assessment of the race as a whole now? We've seen some of these individual events. We've seen, of course, those hustings. We're about halfway through the 12 hustings that are going around the country so far. It seems like we've hit a bit of a moment in this campaign. Up until today, we were getting daily briefings, we were getting new policies, we were getting so much energy and so much announcements all throughout the campaign. Today, there's been barely anything from these campaigns. Have we really reached the point of this race where we're basically seeing it sewn up? Most people have probably voted by now. Have we entered a new phase now?
Well, no, I'm afraid, Tom, it was sewn up before it even began. I mean, I didn't realise the extent to which Rishi Sunak's difficult decisions that he took as Chancellor were going to make it so difficult for him to persuade the party members, and also the fact that a significant minority of them blame him for ousting Boris Johnson completely unreasonably, but that's how they feel. And so I think there was very little he could do to pull it back. But I don't agree with you that there's nothing happening in the campaign. I mean, what is extraordinary to me is that there really ought to be less happening in the campaign, because they ought to be insulting each other a lot less. And yet we've got Kwasi Kwarteng and Simon Clarke. And this is Simon Clarke who accused Dominic Raab of going over the top with his suicide note. Simon Clarke and Kwasi Kwarteng being extremely rude about Rishi Sunak in the Telegraph today, and telling tales out of cabinet about the things that he opposed. And if this goes on,
I wonder if that, because we got those statements last night, obviously in this morning's papers. I wonder if the crescendo we saw yesterday, all of the accusations of being immoral of one hand, of being Trump on the other, of all of this stuff, did we reach that point where potentially now today, where we haven't had this stuff sent through to us, potentially we've reached that crescendo moment, they've realised it's all got a bit nasty and it's going to be smoother now?
Every time I think that they've realised it's all gone too nasty and they're going to hold back, somebody else comes out with something just as insulting. They can't help themselves, and I think that is possibly the most dangerous thing for whoever the new Prime Minister is that the Conservative Party has lost the will to unity, and some of the animosities, some of the things that have been said that can't be unsaid, are going to be so deeply resented. Then it's going to be very difficult for Liz Truss, if it is indeed she, to hold the party together, because that majority of 70 that she inherits from Boris Johnson is going to consist largely of people who hate her guts.
Gosh, well, another 3 or 4 weeks to go. Let's see if it does ameliorate or not. In the meantime, thank you very much, John Rentoul of The Independent, for your thoughts there on the state of play of the race. Well, now, a man alleged to be the 4th member of the so-called Beatles Islamic State terror cell has been charged with terror offences after being deported to England. 38-year-old Ain Davies was arrested yesterday evening after arriving at Luton Airport on a flight from Turkey, and was subsequently charged with terror offences in relation to events in 2014 and with possession of a firearm for the purpose connected with terrorism. Well, let's discuss this further with GBNews Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, first of all, did we know this was coming? Has this been a long time coming?
Yes, counter-terrorism detectives knew that Ian Davis was heading back to the UK because he was effectively deported by the Turkish. He had been in a Turkish prison for the past 6 years, having been convicted in a Turkish court of terrorism offences, namely that he was a member of the Islamic State terror group, something he has always denied. So they deported him now that he has finished his sentence in that country, and waiting for him as he arrived in at Luton Airport were counter-terrorism detectives. He was arrested, taken into custody, and has appeared here at Westminster Magistrates Court. Appeared in court number 1 in the dock wearing a prison-issue grey tracksuit. He spoke only to confirm his name, his date of birth, and the fact that he doesn't any longer have a permanent address here in the UK. Previously, he lived in West London. Now, he faces a total of 3 charges. A charge of possessing of a firearm for the purposes of terrorism. He also is charged with fundraising for terrorist purposes, 2 counts that he faces there. He was remanded back into custody. He'll appear again at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on the 2nd of September. Now, we said that he had been arrested, charged and convicted in Turkey of membership of Islamic State. He's also alleged to have been a member of a notorious execution squad known as the Beatles, thus named because all 4 members of that execution squad were British, including the most notorious member, a man called Mohammed Mwazi. You may remember he was dubbed Jihadi John in the British press as he appeared on those hideous propaganda videos executing, murdering innocent Western hostages, including Alan Henning and David Haines, 2 British hostages. He was killed actually 7 years ago in a US drone strike, and 2 other members of that Beatles group were rounded up, arrested in Syria, and have since been extradited to the United States, where they have been also jailed, convicted for their membership of that particular organisation. So as I say, the next appearance in court will be the 2nd of September from Ian Davis, who denies the charges against him.
And I know that you will keep your ear pressed to the ground in terms of what's going on there. A dramatic story. Thank you, Mark White, of course, GB News Home Affairs and Security Editor, for bringing that to us today. Now, coming up after the break, we'll be joined by the owner of a dog rescue centre who's described her job as utterly soul-destroying due to the amount of dogs being abandoned by rising costs. Well, don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
Welcome back to The Briefing. Now, a dog rescue centre in Manchester has described itself as the most depressing place on earth. Why? Well, because of the amount of dogs being dumped due to the cost of living crisis. Rescue for Dogs has said its phones are ringing all day, every day, with people trying to leave their dogs as they simply can't afford to keep them. Owner and manager of Rescue for Dogs, Emma Billington, says the job is utterly soul-destroying because we know that we are having to turn away dogs that are going to be killed, as there's nowhere else for them to go. She's also invited leadership hopefuls, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, to take some of the phone calls the company receives on a daily basis, hoping it could spark some action. Well, Emma joins us now, I'm delighted to say. This is the most heart-wrenching story, particularly, I think, for people in Britain. We're known as a dog-loving nation, as an animal-loving nation. I suppose you must have been used to some calls like this in the past. Could you give us an indication of just how it differs this year from previous years?
Well, it's twofold, really. So the puppy crisis that happened during COVID was because dogs were allowed to be bred in huge numbers, supply massively exceeded demand eventually, and all the homes dried up. We knew that was coming because no one did anything about it. Unfortunately, we were kind of prepared for a terrible time, but no one was prepared for the cost of living crisis that would follow, because now not only have the homes dried up, but people are unable to afford the vet bills, which have spiralled because you can hardly get a vet appointment at all, and people can't get signed up with vets. There's a vet shortage in the UK and they can just charge what they like. So now people are unable to get the dogs the care that they need, probably because they hadn't thought much about it when they first got their dogs, in a bit of compulsion buying maybe. But now rescue centres across the UK are left to pick up the pieces.
So this is a bit of two blades of scissors, really. On the one hand, people can't afford to keep their dogs. And on the other hand, those people that are trying to give their dogs to shelters, they're finding that the shelters are already full. So we're ending up in this terrible situation. I wonder, what more can people do? What can anyone do to try and alleviate this situation?
Well, that's the desperate feel, isn't it? I mean, I got into it nearly 20 years ago with the idea to help as many as possible. You know, ours is actually called Dogs the Number 4 Rescue, rather than Rescue for Dogs, but it's a kennel-free rescue. And the idea being we could change the way rescue is. You know, we could open it up to more dogs. We could make people trust rescue dogs more. We did it in a completely different way. But unfortunately, the problem we've got now is there's just no homes out there and nobody wants to take on the responsibility. So the only thing we've been able to do is say that if people will help us by fostering for us, we will pay their vet care, we will pay for all the dog food, make sure nobody's financially out of pocket. And that's the only way we can help dogs anymore, which is just soul destroying, to be honest.
Wow, that's extraordinary. But also, what an opportunity for people who might be a little bit older, might be a little bit lonely. That is a really crucial offer. I know many people who've got dogs, and it's really improved their quality of life. It's an extraordinary thing to look after an animal. So that's a really, really great initiative there. I wonder, how difficult is it for people who've never owned animals before? What do they need to know if they were to take you up on this offer? How should they go about adopting a dog?
Okay, well, we're Manchester-based, so we provide all support, but generally keep the dogs up in the northwest, just so that we can provide that support. I would encourage everybody to go to their local rescues, etc., where hopefully they'll get matched with the dog that's right for them. Make sure that you go to somebody reputable. The problem where people go and buy puppies is you've got no idea what you're getting, and that's where the issue comes from. It's all about making the right match. So we have no specific rules. It's about, if we know that that dog is suitable for that person, energy-wise, etc. So you just want to be dealing with somebody who really understands the dog. Get a trainer involved if you can get hold of one. The problem is at the minute everybody's booked up, but it's really about trying to find those homes that wouldn't normally be there. At the end of the day, we know that all the homes that wanted a dog, got a dog, or even just got a dog anyway, and they've been passed around family and friends, and everybody's trying to pick up the pieces for them. But the original problem is there's no homes out there, so we have to create homes. We're also saying two's easier than one, which we always believe in because our dogs are very social. We can help with matching processes. We've got a trainer and behaviourist on site. We're very good at placing our dogs and helping people who might not think their dog is that social. And it's about expanding the number of homes that are there. People might not necessarily think they could have two dogs, but fostering is a great way to get used to them and see if it is something that they can do, because we've just got to increase the number of homes available, and that's the only way we can think about it at the minute.
And I suppose if you're already looking after one dog, it might not be that much of a leap to look after one more. Just finally in this conversation, Emma, you've reached out to both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to see if they'll take any of these calls, to see if they'll come and see your predicament. Have either of them responded yet?
No, I wish they would, and I wish we could just forward some of the emails, because it's the emails where the dogs are going to be put to sleep that we say no to all day, every day. We know these lives are being lost, young, fit, healthy dogs that have no reason to die, and they attach a picture, and that's why I can't sleep at night. And I'd like someone else who has the power and the ability to do something about that, to look at those pictures and think, how are we going to make sure that this never happens again? Because this is making rescue a more impossible task than it already was.
Well, you do an absolutely heroic job. I'm sure many people will have been moved by that story. Emma Billington of Dogs for Rescue, or is it Rescue for Dogs? Remind us the name of the organisation.
It's Dogs for Rescue with the number 4. I'm afraid they got it wrong yesterday and then everyone's calling us the wrong name. But yeah, to try and get hold of us, it's Dogs and the number 4 Rescue.
Dogs and the number 4 Rescue. Well, we can't be clearer than that. Emma Billington, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us all about that dreadful situation. Really appreciate it. Well, coming up, I'll be speaking with Sir John Curtis about what the latest polls are saying, not just in the Tory leadership race, but also more generally. This and so much more, but first, it's your news update with Rihanna.
Thank you, Tom. It's 3:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families ahead of another price hike after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The bosses were also told the government will continue to evaluate the extraordinary profits in certain parts of the sector and consider the appropriate steps to take. The talks at Downing Street follow another dire warning, with a consultancy firm forecasting the cap on energy bills could hit £5,000 next year. A man who is allegedly part of the IS terror cell known as the Beatles has been remanded in custody. Ain Davis was arrested at Luton Airport after being deported from Turkey, where he was serving a prison sentence. The 38-year-old from West London appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, charged with terrorism offences. He'll appear at the Old Bailey next month. A car has hit 5 people in Kent, killing 2 members of the same family and seriously injuring a child. Police say a man in his 80s and a woman in her 30s died after being hit outside a multi-storey car park in Ramsgate. A local man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and leaving the scene of a collision. A man who was killed in shootings on the Isle of Skye and in Wester Ross has been named by police as John McKinnon. 3 other people were injured by gunmen who targeted a number of properties in the area. A 39-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the incidents, which police believe are linked. And water industry insiders say they expect an official drought will be declared tomorrow. An amber heat warning is currently in place, and the risk of wildfires is exceptional across parts of England and Wales for the next few days. The Met Office raised its fire severity index to its highest level following the prolonged dry conditions, with temperatures set to hit 36 degrees on Saturday. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.225 and €1.182. The price of gold currently stands at £1,466.85 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. Well, it might not feel like it, but we are currently entering the midway point of this leadership contest. To me, it feels like we're getting through to the last gasps, but Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is still considered the firm favourite, according to pretty much every poll, whilst the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was favoured marginally by MPs. It would appear that he's struggling to cut through with the membership still. Well, joining me now is polling guru Sir John Curtis to get the latest state of play of the race. And Sir John, it hasn't moved all that much since things began several weeks ago.
Well, it's certainly not moved very much since it became clear that the contest was going to be between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Before that, polls of Tory members had plenty of movement in them, and I think the truth is that if it had been left to Tory members to decide who the top two on the ballot should be, the polling evidence suggests that rather than it being a contest between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, it would be a contest between Penny Mordaunt and Kim Badenoch. But, the MPs were the gatekeepers. But certainly since it's clear who were the two that have been put to the membership, well, Liz Truss has been ahead from the beginning. If anything, according to YouGov, who polled more than once, she is now rather further ahead. Indeed, it's 60% in their most recent poll to just 26% for Rishi Sunak. Though we are promised another poll by opinion towards the end of this week. In a sense, I think what I might almost observe, Tom, is that the interesting thing about this contest is that despite the fact that it seems to be all over by the shouting, journalists like yourself are still giving it a great deal of attention in a way that was not true of the battle between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt back in 2019. Now, in part, it may be because it's August and usually there isn't much politics for folks like you to follow. But I think it also reflects the fact that there is an appreciation that the debate between Mr. Sunak and Ms. Truss, whatever view you take, is an important one. It's important to the future of the Conservative Party. It's important to the future of the country. And of course, it is a debate that to some degree that has been hijacked. And whereas originally it was a debate about how you best manage the macroeconomics of the economy, do you focus on inflation or do you focus on growth? It has, of course, become very much a debate focusing on what do we do about the cost of living crisis and what measures need to be taken. And to that extent, at least, we've seen both candidates having to, in a sense, invent policies on the hoof during the course of the campaign in a way that probably neither of them finds that comfortable with.
Yes, we've had an absolute deluge of policy, sometimes not to the benefit of the candidates proposing that policy, each other accusing each other of U-turns, seemingly coming up with half a dozen policies a day over the last few weeks. I wonder if the reason why journalists are more fixated on this race and following every twist and turn of it more so than in 2019 with Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson is simply because it's a bit grittier. They're putting out more press releases. Indeed, they're being more personal to one another as well. And I just wonder, what might the effect be for whoever wins this race, likely Liz Truss in a few weeks' time? Will she be taking on a damaged Conservative brand as a result of the vitriol, to some extent, of this campaign?
Well, I think there are two answers to that. The first is that actually, during the course of the last couple of weeks, there have been signs of some improvement in the Conservative position in the opinion polls from the, frankly, pretty dire position to which the Conservatives fell in the immediate wake of Boris Johnson's downfall. So at that point, they were down at around 31, 32. They seem to have got themselves back up to 34. And the truth is that actually the focus on the Conservatives in all the domestic news coverage in recent weeks has meant that the Labour Party has rather struggled to come up for air. And so, yes, we may have had two visions of the Conservative Party being put before us, but it has meant that the Labour Party has had not much chance or ability to gain much in the way of attention. I think it's interesting that finally tomorrow we're told that Sir Keir Starmer is eventually going to tell us what the Labour Party would actually do about the cost of living crisis. The truth is, I think the Labour Party has been caught to some degree on the hop about how to deal with this crisis, as well as the two candidates. So that's part of the answer to you. The other answer, yes, of course, is I think what is clear is that the animosity and just also the simple difference of view that's been articulated between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak is not going to be that easy to heal. I suspect that if we assume that Liz Truss makes it, that not everybody who is currently in cabinet or was recently in cabinet who is backing Rishi Sunak will necessarily want to serve under her. And we do have to remember that however well she does amongst the Tory members' ballot, she wasn't that popular amongst Conservative MPs and only got into second place in the last ballot. And she will need to be able to demonstrate to her parliamentary colleagues that she is indeed going to set the party in a clear direction, one that deals with the immediate cost of living crisis, and which demonstrates also that she can deal with Sir Keir Starmer at the dispatch box. It's going to be a very considerable challenge, I think, for her to try and bring the party back together.
And just finally in this conversation, on that question of challenging Sir Keir Starmer, both candidates have claimed to be the candidate who polls best against the Labour Party, who could defeat the Labour Party at the next election. In a sentence, if you would, who's right?
The truth is, it's not clear that either of them will necessarily be that successful. But the truth is that on balance now, the polls suggest that perhaps if you ask people to choose between either of these two candidates, Sir Keir Starmer, Liz Truss, maybe just ahead of Mr. Sir Keir, and that Rishi Sunak may be just behind. But there's not an awful lot between them on this criteria.
Really, really interesting stuff there. So, John Curtis, thank you very much for talking through the intricacies of the polling of this race. Really appreciate it. Now, rising energy costs have catapulted, of course, to the top of the leadership agenda once again this week. Forecasts suggesting energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. The latest rise in the energy price cap will be announced at the end of the month and will come into force in October. The government is facing calls to provide increased support, and both leadership candidates are suggesting policies to try and fix that growing crisis. Well, joining me now is the chairman of Utilita Energy, Derek Lickonish, MBE. Thank you very much for joining me. I suppose the first question must be about this price cap, because most people at home will be very confused hearing the words price cap and yet seeing their bills rising and rising and predicted to rise to quite extraordinary levels. What's going on?
Good afternoon, Tom. Yes, I feel very, very sorry for consumers and, of course, the fuel poor and vulnerable in particular. And when you consider that energy bills just, 14 months ago were about £1,900 a year, be £3,600 a year from the 1st of October, and who knows where it's going to be. Now, the price cap, which is set by Ofgem, sets a maximum price for each unit of electricity and for each unit of gas. What it doesn't do is set a cap on the bill that customers will actually receive, because that is determined by the consumption. So the figures when we talk about this, say the £3,600 a year expected from the 1st of October, that's for an average customer. So if you use more than average, or you have a big demand for heating, you will pay more than that figure. So that is why I have been so determined to try and get government's attention on the introduction of a social tariff. And initially that to be in place by the 1st of January for all fuel poor and vulnerable customers. And if you have no idea how many people are in that space, I was quite astonished when I was given the figures. But we have probably 8 million households will be in the fuel poor category. 4.5 million of those households earn less than £12,570 a year. If you and consequently don't pay any tax, so therefore wouldn't benefit from a tax cut. And if you live on benefits completely, you of course pay no tax at all. So any giveaway on the income tax front won't help those people. But if we had a social tariff set at a price which is affordable and funded by the Treasury, I think that starts to break down the problem into more of a bite-sized chunk. And various people have different views about this, but there are certainly now more and more suppliers in favour of a social tariff to help us move this problem forward and take all the anxiety and stress out of it for so many households. And today, hearing now that it could potentially get to £5,000 a year, and we've got people on low incomes looking at that and thinking, how on earth am I going to survive this winter? And if you'll just indulge me a little bit more, when you look at how much energy you actually get, how long will it last? So let's take how much energy did £50 get you in 2020? Well, back then, that would enable you to have your home heated, illuminated, TV and so on for about 10 to 12 days. So £50 back then, 10 to 12 days. When the new cap comes in on the 1st of October, that figure falls to 3.5 days. And if the cap does reach the bigger figure in January, which I am very certain that it will, that figure then drops down to 2.8 days. So this is really very serious, and I don't believe we've really got the government's attention on it as it should be right at this point in time.
Of course, the government, or at least this rump government as we're experiencing it now, this caretaker government, one might say, met with these energy companies today, met with the big energy companies, I should say, in Downing Street. Didn't come out with it. We weren't expecting any big solution from them, but they had a discussion. This idea of a social tariff would be extraordinarily expensive, tens of billions of pounds. I wonder, what would your proposal be in terms of how it's funded?
Well, my proposal is quite clear. You talk about that being billions of pounds, so is the 37 billion that the Chancellor has put forward for the current package. And as we know, when he announced that package, if you take the £400 that we're all about to get in October, and that's to everyone, it's a universal benefit, that £400 was based on the expectation that the price cap would be £2,800.
And they're expecting that to double.
3,600.
Yeah.
So it's going to be going up much more. And the price of gas, when the Chancellor announced that, and I'm just going to check my notes here, was 237 pence a therm. The gas price last night closed at 503 pence a therm. So everything is moving in the wrong direction. But
we are talking about gargantuan amounts of money here. 37 billion to deal with what was going on before. Now that potentially more than doubling. It is the most extraordinary situation. I wonder whether politicians will balk at the numbers or follow through. But I suppose that remains to be seen. We'll have to have you back to talk more about this later. But for now, Derek Licorice of Utilita Energy, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing. Finally today, the conflict in Ukraine is rumbling on, very relevant, of course, to this energy crisis. Over the past few days, we've seen a number of developments, including 2 huge explosions at a Russian airbase in Crimea. Attention has turned to the south of Ukraine, with Ukraine's armed forces launching a counterattack in the Kherson region. Attacks on bridges along the Dnieper River have left Russian forces cut off from their supply lines. Well, joining me to discuss these latest developments is Keir Giles, a Senior Consulting Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. And Keir, I suppose the big question is, there's a divide among the West. Some countries talk in the language of Ukraine being able to win this war. Others talk in terms of managing some sort of settlement. What is your assessment in terms of whether or not Ukraine could actually defeat Russia?
Well, the problem with that divide you just described, Tom, is it is exactly the same challenge that Ukraine has faced from day one of this conflict. And the divide is always along the same lines. There are those countries that recognize that the fighting might be in Ukraine, but that's actually just the front line for the whole of Europe. And this is all of our fight to protect all of us against Russia. And then those countries that are protected by distance from what Russia does and would much rather go back to business as usual as soon as possible and haven't learned from experience that would just mean Russia saving up for another day when it can launch another offensive against Europe. That determines who's supporting Ukraine the strongest. It also determines who is trying to push Ukraine forward towards actually winning a victory in a way that is undeniable in Russia itself, and who instead just wants to bring the fighting to an end as quickly as possible, even if it leaves Russia thinking that they have actually won. But you're right, the nature of the conflict is changing all the time. We've seen despair change to optimism several times through this conflict. And what's happening now, this gearing up apparently for a major offensive by Ukraine in Kherson in the south, pushing forwards and recapturing, liberating those occupied territories where Russian forces have been now for several months, is being accompanied by these long-range strikes that you mentioned. A demonstration by Ukraine that they can hit serious and important and critically important targets deep in Russia's rear, in Crimea, the vital bridges for supplies coming into those Russian forces that are on the Ukrainian banks of the Dnieper River, and so on. So, yes, Ukraine certainly wants everybody to think that there is a major offensive coming, and certainly Russia seems to have convinced. The British Ministry of Defence is saying Russia is moving forces southwards from that offensive of their own in the east of the country, in Donbass, in order to prepare for this offensive coming in. But we still don't know for certain what exactly lies behind that big news of the last couple of days, that strike on major Russian airbase in Crimea. Everybody's still guessing how exactly Ukraine did that and with what.
Well, as you were speaking there, viewers on television would have been able to see a map of just where Russia is occupying. I wonder if we can pull that back up, because this issue of Kherson is really interesting. It's the last bit that Russia have of Ukraine to the west of the Dnieper River. And if Ukraine can actually push them out of that area, if they can be pushed back to the east of the river, this really does change the nature of this conflict. It becomes potentially much more static. What would your assessment be of whether or not Russia is able to push them to the east of the river?
Well, more static is one possible outcome of that. More fluid is another one, because then, of course, Ukraine is within striking distance of Crimea and of those ports on the Sea of Azov on the eastern side of Crimea that they lost so early in the conflict, and which have been really important in terms of this economic blockade that Russia has kept on Ukraine, this stranglehold of the Ukrainian economy. So, yes, it could move in several different directions, and it is, at this point, completely unpredictable.
Now, we don't have that much time left, but I do want to raise this issue of a report by Amnesty International into where resources have been kept and the implications of this report. Some commentators saying that Amnesty, unwittingly perhaps, have been giving a gift of propaganda to the Russians.
Well, there's no doubt that it is a gift to Russian propaganda, and it's been exploited as such by Russian propaganda and disinformation worldwide, because, of course, it tells Russia exactly what they want to hear, that they are perfectly justified in striking at civilian targets within Ukraine, because Amnesty International, a respected international organization, says that Ukrainian forces have been hiding among them. So what better excuse do you need if you are a Russian targeting officer wanting to strike at a Ukrainian city and cause mass civilian casualties than that Amnesty International says it's all right? Now, let's not forget Amnesty have also in the past criticized Russian practices in this war, but this was a terrible lapse of judgment by whoever allowed this to go out, bypassing the local Amnesty staffers on the ground in Ukraine and letting it be presented as a very one-side report, criticizing only the Ukrainian forces for defending cities while ignoring exactly the same practice by Russia. So yes, absolutely, it's perfectly understandable why Russia is taking this, running with it and milking it for all they're worth.
Really extraordinary lapse of judgment by Amnesty there. Let's hope that they make amends for that in whatever way they can. But for now, Keir Giles, thank you very much for talking us through that latest situation. There's some hope there in the Kherson region. Well, you've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. The show is back every weekday from 9:30. Up next, it's Colin Brazier, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. The Met Office amber extreme heat warning is in place until the end of Sunday. Where we've got the warning, temperatures could reach the mid-30s in places over the next few days. And it's the number of days with high temperatures at night that could cause health issues. But it's going to be fairly warm right across the UK again tomorrow. The main exception being northern Scotland, where we do have this weather front bringing cloud and rain through this evening, just trickling into the mainland, so of course parts of the Highlands. But elsewhere further south, it's a dry, fine, balmy summer's evening, leading into a largely clear night. Might just turn a little misty once more across parts of eastern England. Temperatures, well, in some rural spots across the north could dip down to single figures, but for most it is a pretty warm night. It's going to be fairly difficult for sleeping once more, particularly staying warm well into the evening. And it's going to be another hot one tomorrow as well. Again, there will be thicker cloud across northern Scotland with some patchy rain, but I suspect the Highlands and the Western Isles will be drier and brighter than today, and a touch warmer too. There will be some mist and low cloud just clinging to parts of the coast across the northeast, and it will be cooler by the sea here, but elsewhere it's going to be hotter than today. 34, 35 likely across parts of the south. We might even hit 36 Celsius. During Friday evening, again, it's a balmy summer's evening, staying quite murky across the coasts of the northeast. A bit more of that low cloud around as we head into Saturday. Still, the thicker cloud in the far north with that weather front bringing a bit of patchy rain to Shetland. But again, for the majority, Saturday is another blue sky day with lots of hot sunshine and temperatures more widely into the low 30s and possibly up into the mid 30s once more across parts of the south, where again we're likely to top out at 35 or maybe 36 Celsius. Again, the coast in the northeast will be a little bit cooler. As for the outlook, well, we are looking at potentially a bit of a change. Hot and sunny on Sunday, but this low will bring some showers next week.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazy. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 this afternoon. In the next hour, ministers have met with the bosses of Britain's energy giants today, looking to ease pressure on households facing rising bills. Forecasts, they're predicting now average annual energy costs could rise to over, well, getting on for £4,500 come January. Also, predictions of blackouts as the UK faces having to ration electricity, something last seen in Britain in the 1970s. But are there? Here's a question you'll not see anywhere else. Are there any upsides to the energy crunch? Might this be the jolt that some households need to consume less energy and be more environmentally conscious? Also this hour, we'll get the latest from Mark White after an Islamist alleged to be one of the so-called Islamic State Beatles in Syria appeared in court after being deported to the UK by the Turks. And 4:30, the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens will discuss his article in the Mail today suggesting successive governments have failed to get a grip on crime. That's a very pithy summary of a complicated argument. He'll be laying it out for you within the hour. With me for the next 2 hours, the editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell. But first, we've got the latest news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. 2 minutes past 4. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. The Chancellor says the government will continue to evaluate the extraordinary profits being made in certain parts of the sector and consider what steps to take. Tory leadership contender Liz Truss has hinted she would consider further support for struggling households if she becomes Prime Minister. She made the comments during the People's Forum on GB News, having previously taken a hard stance on so-called handouts. The Foreign Secretary and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak will address Tory party members at a hustings in Cheltenham this evening. Former leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith supports Liz Truss's approach to the crisis.
What you want to do is to make sure, and she said this, any support we give must be properly targeted and measured against those who need it most, so that those people can get the support that they need, rather than just scattering it across a whole income range right the way up to people like you and me who are going to receive more money later on in October, when you could argue that we're not the ones in need, it's those in need who are facing difficulties with their bills. So targeted support is what she's talking about, properly measured and also funded.
A man who was allegedly part of the IS terror cell known as the Beatles has been remanded in custody. Ian Davis was arrested at Luton Airport after being deported from Turkey, where he was serving a prison sentence. The 38-year-old from West London appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court charged with terrorism offences. He'll now appear at the Old Bailey next month. A car has hit 5 people in Kent, killing 2 members of the same family and seriously injuring a child. Police say a man in his 80s and a woman in her 30s died after being hit outside a multi-storey car park in Ramsgate. A local man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and leaving the scene of a collision. A man who was killed in shootings on the Isle of Skye and in Wester Ross has been named by police as John McKinnon. 3 other people were injured by a gunman who targeted a number of properties in the area. A 39-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the incidents, which police believe are linked. Police Scotland says there's no further threat to the community.
The thoughts of myself and colleagues across Police Scotland are very much with the family and friends of Mr. McKinnon and the 3 people who remain injured. These incidents took place in a close-knit rural area and have a significant impact not only on those directly affected but also friends and neighbours living in these communities.
Ryan Giggs' ex-girlfriend has told a court she's hugely ashamed that she kept going back to the former Manchester United player who promised the world. The 48-year-old is on trial accused of controlling and coercive behaviour as well as assault against Kate Greville. Asked why she moved into his home if he'd been a serial and violent abuser, she said the cycle of abuse made her feel insecure. Giggs is also accused of assaulting her sister. He denies all of the charges against him. 26 countries have pledged more than £1.2 billion in aid to boost Ukraine's military defence against Russia. The UK has also promised to send more weapons, including multiple launch rocket systems and precision-guided missiles. Speaking at an event in Copenhagen, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the international community has to come to agreement on helping Ukraine.
We have come out of this meeting with more pledges of finance, more pledges of training and more pledges of military aid, all designed to help Ukraine win, to help Ukraine stand up for its sovereignty, and indeed to ensure that President Putin's ambitions fail in Ukraine, as they rightly should.
Water industry insiders say they expect an official drought to be declared from tomorrow. An amber heat warning is currently in place and the risk of wildfires is exceptional across parts of England and Wales for the next few days. The Met Office has raised its fire severity index to its highest level following the prolonged dry conditions, with temperatures set to hit 36 degrees on Saturday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Colin Brazier.
Just gone 8 minutes past 4. Welcome. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's appealed to electricity companies to act, as he put it, in the national interest to help ease the pressure on vulnerable consumers in the face of soaring energy prices. Ministers met with the bosses of the UK's energy giants earlier after analysts warned that average annual household energy bills were set to top £4,200 come the start of next year. Shell and BP, which made combined profits of nearly £30 billion in the first half of the year, were absent from Downing Street. But of course, big companies are paying a 25% windfall tax, lest we forget. But also this week, a warning of possible blackouts this coming winter as the UK potentially faces having to ration electricity. And that's the reason we're playing those black and white pictures from the 1970s. It was last seen in the UK back in those, winter of discontent, and actually more in the early 70s, wasn't it, with the strikes that were going on then. Can it really return, that sort of thing? Joining me, the CEO of energy market analysis company Papaya, and that is Christina Rabaitsitai. Christina, welcome to you. Thanks for coming in today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Can I start with this odd question? And it's not one we've addressed before, and some people think it's probably ill-judged. I'm going to plough ahead with it, if you don't mind anyway, which is that we've spent years encouraging people to consume less electricity, and we know that one of the most effective instruments for making people change their behaviours is price. Golly, price is high. Will behaviour change? Yes, it must, right?
Well, I think even today is actually a funny story. I was speaking to a lady, and she said that even during the heat wave that happened a couple of weeks ago and is starting now, she said not once did she turn the fan on. Because she was hoping that when her bills are recalculated, they'll see that she's consuming less. And so people are saving, now, not even before we even hit the winter.
But that's the environmentally conscious thing to do, isn't it? Using less fossil fuels. I mean, some of it's going to be renewable energy, but you see what I'm driving at? That there may be an upside to this story with so many downsides.
I think it's definitely a positive thing to consume less, especially if we do it without care. But I think we're reaching the point where I don't think we can be consuming any less without affecting people's livelihoods, and especially businesses. Because if you can imagine, businesses don't even have a cap there.
Wow.
They're not protected. So they have to produce less of certain thing, which makes it scarce, and it just starts to spiral.
And Christy, where are we on the split? I mean, in terms of how much, because heavy industry is a massive user of electricity, right, compared to domestic households. What is the split roughly?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look that information up. I can't tell you.
But they're big users. They're big users. And if they're turning off the power, the production line's stopping, the lights are going off, the factory's mothballed. I mean, and people are out of work. I mean.
Well, I think one big user that covers the domestic is the gas. So actually, domestic would be weighing quite heavily as well. So I think they equally need to be taken care of.
Cathy Kinjal, I raise this question because it just seems to be like one of those stories you get, and I know you probably think differently from a lot of people. And the other example would be something like obesity, when we'll talk about the cost of living crisis and rising food prices, and that runs parallel with the fact we've also got an obesity crisis. It's considered bad manners to suggest there might be an upside to something so dreadful.
I think the upside you're suggesting is that the price of the electricity will make people behave better, environmentally better. Well, actually, that's been happening for years. Electricity, power, fuel, energy consumption has been going down in Europe over years, and that's been impacting on business, as you said. So the stuff I've read from the Global Warming Policy Foundation shows that this is already a suicidal policy. The price rises, which have done with this crazy green policy we've been having for years, that's inflated all the prices and made us so much less efficient, has dramatically impacted on Europe and our behaviour, and probably the eco people want it. They want us all in a subsistence economy, but this isn't the way to reduce poverty. This isn't the way to level up. So I think some of the things you're saying have actually been happening, but people aren't aware of what the real reasons for the price rises were.
Christina, let's talk about what's happening today. The Prime Minister Downing Street, they've had the bosses of energy companies in. What difference will that make? I mean, it's presentation. It's quite nice for Downing Street to be able to say, we're banging heads together. We're conscious that these big energy companies need to do what they can to keep costs down and reduce bills. But, I mean, they can't, right? Because the wholesale price is so high.
I mean, it's not in their interest to, to cut or
profits.
Cut their profits in any way. So I think the only outcome that we can get from today's meeting is something that will benefit the companies, especially in the long run. So what my expectations are is that they might allow people to pay back, instead of a loan form, their bills over a longer period of time, which means that they will pay a price of X right now, and then when the prices come down, they will continue to pay the higher amount until they pay the debt, probably with interest, which means that those big companies will lock them in over a longer period of time and will make money over time. So they're essentially becoming banks.
Do you foresee, Christina, blackouts this winter?
I don't want to freak the nation out, but if we have low wind generation again, and if we have a cold winter, there's going to be a very, very high chance of blackouts.
And I don't think you've got an axe to grind on this one. Does that tell us that we've been overly reliant on wind turbines and we haven't made sure the energy mix is mixed enough?
Coming from renewable industry...
Kathy, isn't it nice when somebody thinks hard about an answer?
I'm waiting and praying that you're going to say yes, that we have overinvested at the expense of everything else.
This is where she gets to...
I think one thing that we probably haven't invested enough into is the technologies to go hand in hand with the wind and the solar, because it's obvious that wind and solar are not going to do it on their own. Wind is too intermittent, solar doesn't generate at night, obvious. But we have to have a mixture of other technologies. And I think I agree with the fact that we underinvested in gas, and mostly not because we didn't have the cash in place, it's because the policies were just so unclear for all the people that wanted to build more assets in that.
Oh, that's my computer, let me turn it down. Was it mad to pull back on nuclear? Was it mad to decommission our gas storage rough oil container under the sea of the North Sea? How mad were both those things?
I definitely agree with rough decommissioning. I think when that decision was made, the power prices were at £40-30. So nobody saw it as as going to be an issue going forward. So. It was certainly, and we've got another gas plant that is sitting, that could be, helping us right now is 2 gigawatts. But because they're not getting favourable terms from the government, the energy company just doesn't want to, bring it back to life. So there's help out there, but the government really needs to, have a look at everything that's available right now and start invest and make the policies favourable so people do it.
Christina Rebesaitai from Papaya. Christina, thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time. Anything else to say, Kathy?
Well, I would be getting rid of the emissions trading scheme, VAT off energy, getting rid of subsidies to renewables. This is going to be a long, hard road to bring energy prices back down. And the government's got a lot of explaining to do, because governments over the last 20 years have caused this. So the whole political class has got a lot of explaining to do to the public, who are really going to suffer this winter.
Okay.
Probably paying up, a fifth of their money in energy bills, a fourth or a fifth. It's shocking that we've come to this.
Kathy, Christina, thanks both very much indeed. With less than a month to go until the new leader of the Conservative Party is selected by Conservative Party members, Liz Truss appeared on GB News to take questions almost around about this time yesterday, wasn't it, from the public on key policy areas. If you missed it, it's still available online. It was a treat, actually. It was, we called it the People's Forum. It was held in Lee, in Greater Manchester. It was Alistair Stewart was holding the ring, taking questions from members of the public. Subjects been entertained and ventilated that you wouldn't normally necessarily see. It was absolutely fascinating. And the Foreign Secretary spoke, amongst other things, about immigration, pledging to stop the European Court of Human Rights from blocking flights to Rwanda.
I would do, if I'm elected as your Prime Minister, is make the Rwanda policy work by, through the British Bill of Rights, ensuring that we can't be overruled by the ECHR. Because that's been a problem, that we had the ruling from the ECHR and that stopped the policy going ahead. So I would make sure we legislate for Britain that we are in control of our own policy and we can't be overruled by the ECHR.
Well, on tax, Liz Truss confirmed the rise in national insurance would be revoked, but there was some ambiguity as to when that will happen.
I would reverse the national insurance rise, and I'd also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy. So from day one, families are keeping more of their own money. I will get it in as soon as possible. But
that's not day one. That's as soon as possible.
I will act on day one to make it happen as soon as possible, but it will happen well before April.
Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, has said he would rather lose the Conservative leadership race than win on a false premise. The former Chancellor said he would tell people what they needed to hear and stay true to his values. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood was in Lee yesterday, back in London now. It was good, wasn't it?
Yes, it was really quite a unique experience where not just it was a sort of question and then the candidate rambles on, but on so many of these occasions, the straight-talking people of Lee, the GB News viewers who had been invited to this event, were able to have a conversation with the candidate, put their point across, have follow-up questions and really lead that discussion. Now, in a lot of these hustings, what you have is someone ask a question, someone else holds the microphone for them. It's then whisked away with no opportunity to follow up, any opportunity to get beyond the sound bites. But I think yesterday we really did, in a number of these occasions, get beyond the sound bites, and on some of these, learn things that were new.
You're absolutely right. And Tom, what was there was a level of political literacy which I'm not surprised by, but I think sometimes people in mainstream media would be. And also determination, you heard it time and time again, it was a refrain almost. People were saying, what are you going to do about? And it was very personal, that sense that you may be in this exalted position as our future Prime Minister, but we're the people who put you there.
But it wasn't aggressive. And I think so often these things can be shouting matches, can be aggressive. What it was demanding, but there was a respect there from the people who had turned up. They wanted to hear what Liz Truss had to say. They didn't want to interrupt or shout over. It was a respectful, robust conversation between Liz Truss and the people of a pretty vital constituency, a constituency that had been held by the Labour Party for nigh on 100 years, won by Boris Johnson just 3 years ago. And if the next leader of the Conservative Party, if the next Prime Minister wants to have any size of decent majority at all, it's a seat they need to hold.
Cathy Gingell, how's Liz Truss doing?
Well, I don't think she's doing too badly, and I'm really pleased about the debate you did, because I think one of the big, really lapses in the media, not GB News, not Tom, over the whole lockdown was the total failure of asking the right questions by the journalists and reporters, going along uncritically. And I think you're right, this did show a change of gear on that, and allowing the people not in question time, for heaven's sake, on the BBC with a totally imbalanced audience, confronting the candidate with that. But there's still a gap between some of the really hard questions that need to be asked about the responsibility both of them have had for where the mess we're in now. The cabinet they were in, the cabinet they didn't resign from, or Rishi Sunak only resigned from it. Liz Truss never did.
Tom, the action moved back to London today. I've just been seeing Ben Wallace, actually, as well. A sense just today, perhaps, that we've had a week or two of almost this interregnum where government just took a breather, Boris put his dancing shoes on, all the rest of it, and a bit of paralysis, actually, in the heart of government sort of came to an end today.
It's almost in parallel with the leadership contest. Today has been the first day where my phone hasn't been pinging off the hook from various announcements from both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, frankly slagging each other off to a great degree. And I think that we really reached a crescendo of that vitriol within the Conservative Party leadership election yesterday. Today, a lot quieter, and potentially the action returning to the government that is still in place, perhaps a zombie government, perhaps a caretaker government, whatever you want to call it. But frankly, Boris Johnson is still the Prime Minister, Nadhim Zahawi is still the Chancellor, and indeed Kwasi Kwarteng is the Business Secretary, and they've been meeting with senior energy leaders today to talk through this, although one caveat. When Boris Johnson resigned, he said that he would not be pushing through any new legislation, that he wouldn't be announcing any big new spending commitment, that he wouldn't
you can sort of see the sense of that, can't you?
Binding the hands of his successor would be wrong, and that's a convention that he has followed. So what we're seeing now is a lot of preparatory work. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, saying that a lot of work is going on in the Treasury, ready for whoever comes in to have some options in front of them to go immediately, but also those conversations. And it's interesting to note that people leading those conversations today, Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business Secretary, and Nadhim Zahawi, Zahawi, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, two people backing Liz Truss, two people leading those conversations with industry. Perhaps there's some preparatory work going on.
I wonder. Tom, thanks very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, a man who is alleged to have been part of the Islamic State cell that was nicknamed bitterly the Beatles has been remanded in custody here in the UK. We'll have the latest from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, on that story. Back in a tick.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, a man alleged to be one of the so-called Islamic State Beatles appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court today. This is 38-year-old Ina Davis, who's charged with terrorism offences after being deported to Britain by the Turks. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is at Westminster Magistrates Court with the latest. Mark.
Well, Ina Davis arrived here yesterday and was immediately met by counter-terrorism detectives at Luton Airport. They were expecting him because he had been deported by Turkish authorities, having served a 6-year jail term, found guilty in the Turkish courts of membership of the terror group Islamic State, something he's always denied. He's always denied as well, Colin, being the fourth member of this notorious execution squad that was known as the Beatles, because all four members of the squad were British and were nicknamed by those they took hostage, the Beatles. Of course, you remember the most notorious of this group, Mohammed Emwazi, who was dubbed in the press Jihadi John, who wore a ski mask and appeared in those hideous propaganda videos murdering innocent hostages, including the British hostages, David Haynes and Alan Henning. Well, of course, this man, Ina Davis, is accused of being the fourth member of that group. He vigorously denies that particular charge. Mohammed Emwazi himself was killed 7 years ago in a US drone strike. Two other members of this terror cell were captured after Islamic State fell and were deported to the United States, where they have since been convicted for being a member of this terror cell. Now, in court today, Ian Davis spoke only to confirm his name, his date of birth, and the fact that he no longer has a permanent address here in the UK. He was previously from West London. He faces 3 charges. 1, the possession of a firearm with an intent for terrorist purposes, and 2 counts of raising funds for a terrorist purpose. He was remanded back into custody, Colin, taken off to Belmarsh Prison, and he'll appear in court again, this time the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on the 2nd of September.
The Magistrates Court for us today. Mark, thanks very much indeed. Let's just take you back to our main story today. Energy prices, what to do. What do you think? Some of you think these thoughts. Malcolm says people will use less energy to try to offset some of the increases. The question is around EVs. What will they do to reduce the need for electricity, and what will they do if there are blackouts? I think EVs standing for electric vehicles, Kathy? Yeah. Derek says, so the Tories have taken us back to the 1970s. Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary pledges more aid to Ukraine. Seems our own folk are second-class citizens under this crowd. Well, money on defence in Ukraine's one thing. What about that £12 billion of foreign aid? Dam says, price will make many useless energy. Let me read that again. Price will make many useless. No, it doesn't make any sense. I'm going to move straight on. Well, to this. Unfortunate. No, it still doesn't make sense. Andy, let's hope Andy makes a bit more sense. My worry, says Andy, with energy prices is like fuel prices. They are quick to increase, but very slow to come down. Not only higher highs, but also higher lows, if that makes sense. Kathy Gingell alongside me today to reflect on the political problem, the economic problem, but the political headache for the government of rising energy prices.
Oh, I think it's the explanation, because the higher policy costs have come because of their policies over time.
Well, they've come about because Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine.
They've come about because Vladimir Putin at the time chose to invade and cause the disruption when Europe certainly become almost totally dependent on gas because of their poor investment in renewables. We know Germany, the closing down of the nuclear power station. It looks like in Germany the irony is they're going to go back to coal now. I mean, you really can't make it up, but they have invested over 20 years in inferior renewables that are inefficient. This doesn't work in the end, and it's certainly pushed the price of oil and gas up. In America, you know, Biden's saying, oh, I'm terribly cross, why aren't you giving us more oil now? And the oil companies are coming back, well, saying over 100 of our refineries under your decrees are being turned over to biofuel, renewable technology. So really the politicians have got us into a crazy mess over this.
And it's funny, I mean, I assume that good politicians, are canny, they're shrewd, maybe a bit cynical. But what you describe in Germany as bad choices was based on a kind of naivety, a wishful thinking that actually, Vladimir Putin, we're not sure about him, but he seems like the kind. He's told us he'll keep the gas running. So I tell you what we'll do. We'll import 40% of all our gas into Germany.
No, well, you've got to go a step back.
That was crackers.
It's crackers, but you've got to go a step back. It wasn't naive, it was ideological. There's been a strong ideological move in the EU over the last 30 years. Instead of doing nuclear, the things you talked about, other forms of clean technology, instead of fracking, has been to go down this green road. It's made them very, very vulnerable. And German industry might collapse this autumn. I mean, it's a form of suicide that our politicians have taken us into. And of course, Putin isn't stupid. Everyone's saying he was dumb. He's certainly not dumb. No. He's taken full advantage.
And it may be full advantage that results in deaths. I mean, literally, if you've ever been in Berlin in December or January, you'll know how cold those east wind blows.
We really don't want to worry now about the warm people. Far, far more people die of cold, and in this country too. If you look at the statistics, deaths come from cold, not from the few heat waves we have.
Good. Yeah, well, interesting, but I was going to say good point. Interesting point is a difficult point to contend with, but you're absolutely right. Kathy, thanks very much indeed. Coming up after the break, we'll be bringing you Speaker's Corner. Kathy Gingell today is speaking out on a topic she's passionate about. I recommend you listen in. And the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens will discuss his article in the Mail today, suggesting successive governments have failed to get a grip on crime. In fact, more than that, they've massaged the figures downwards, so you don't really notice that things are getting a whole lot worse. Let's bring you the latest news headlines. First with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. It's 4:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting that the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. And in breaking news just in, a 39-year-old man has been charged following incidents in Skye and Wester Ross, which left one man dead and 3 people injured. John McKinnon was killed as a gunman targeted a number of properties in the area. His family released a statement describing him as a loving husband and father of 6. The suspect is due to appear at Inverness Sheriff Court on Friday. A man who was allegedly part of the IS terror cell known as the Beatles has been remanded in custody. Aine Davis was arrested at Luton Airport after being deported from Turkey, where he was serving a prison sentence. The 38-year-old from West London is charged with terrorism offences and will appear at the Old Bailey next month. A car has hit 5 people in Kent, killing 2 members of the same family and seriously injuring a child. Police say a man in his 80s and a woman in her 30s died after being hit outside a multi-storey car park in Ramsgate. A local man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and leaving the scene of a collision. And water industry insiders say they expect an official drought will be declared tomorrow. An amber heat warning is currently in place and the risk of wildfires is exceptional across parts of England and Wales for the next few days. The Met Office raised its fire severity index to its highest level following the prolonged dry conditions, with temperatures set to hit 36 degrees on Saturday. We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Time now to go back to Colin Brazier. Just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi, welcome back. It's time for us to visit Speaker's Corner. This is the part of the show where we let our studio guests get their views off their chest about a topic they feel particularly strongly about. Today it's the turn of the editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell. For the next 2 minutes or thereabouts, Cathy, the show is yours.
Thank you, Colin. Love and marriage, they go together like a horse and carriage. This, I tell you, brother, You can't have one without the other. So sang Frank Sinatra back in 1966, when the original 1955 lyric was still just about accepted as a fact. It's an institute you can't disparage. Ask the local gentry, and they will say it's elementary, it went on. But no longer. In the years since then, we've witnessed the inexorable rise of social dysfunction, addiction, mental health, abortion, crime, single motherhood, cohabitation, and relational breakdown, and loneliness, you name it. Why? Well, the answer lies in yesterday's Daily Mail front page news. A minority of babies born to married couples, it said, for the first time since 1845. And it marked more than a statistic. It showed how far, as a society, we've turned our backs on the most basic of social contracts, the one that bonds society and secures the safety of future generations. It matters. Marriage is the basis of social order. It determines responsibility, identity, and belonging. And who that matters most for is children. The evidence is there for anyone to see. Children born to married couples do better on every score, on all life chances, from work success to mental health. And that's regardless of the economic background of the parents. But with the marriage rate also at its lowest ever, 50% down since the 70s, the majority of children are penalised. For it's only the very rich who can afford to marry these days. Only the rich who can take the social decision that advantages them and their children. If this government was really committed to levelling up, they'd reverse their 20 years plus anti-marriage, pro-single public policy and forget the farce of more expensive and futile state intervention that will only benefit the bureaucrats and those set on destroying the family. It's not just the church that's lost the moral plot and no longer teaches why marriage was ordained for the procreation of children. Both political parties have long since been rewarding hyper-individualism, inherently self-centred cohabitation and unmarried state dependency, paid for by the ever fewer unfairly taxed married families. The result is today's cohabiting and fragmented society. No uncles, no aunts, no grandparents to rely on, where signing a mobile phone contract is more important than signing the marriage one. Most young adults still want to marry, but no one is teaching them that this is the real marker of maturity. No one rewards them for it. Today, taking that step is still the most important and now the most courageous and truly conservative levelling up thing you can do. It's the most important decision I ever took, and I'm eternally grateful it's one my late husband insisted on. We're the only bulwark left against the state and the only surety for future generations.
Your thoughts on what Cathy Gingell had to say. Let me just turn to Cathy and say thank you for that. That's very moving. And of course, I agree with every word, and there'll be many people who disagree with much of what you said. One thing is uncontestable, surely. You mentioned children several times there, and I'm often struck in conversations around marriage and how necessary or otherwise it is that the voices of children are very, very rarely heard. Because surely the vast majority of children, when they see parents who are struggling to stay together, their voices ought to be heard. But children like the stability that comes from that institution, don't they?
Children aren't being given a choice because adults are invited to be selfish and look at the situation from their own point of view, not their children. And of course, having children should be, and rearing them is an unselfish act. It has to be, to do it properly. So you can't forever put yourself first and put your own possible future choices forever on hold. And there's a real problem for children if the parents don't commit. The children live with that uncertainty too. And we do know that cohabiting couples do break up much, much more quickly than married couples where there are children involved. And we know too from the evidence when we listen to children, they hate it.
And people will always say, you can hear them now, can't you, saying, but I know, I've been cohabiting for years, it's brilliant, my kids love it. And of course, this is one of the problems with the public debate in this country, that we tend to focus on individual examples. We don't concentrate on the metadata. We don't speak in generalities. People think that speaking in generalisations is a bad thing. Actually, it's the only way to have a debate about this kind of public policy.
And actually, it's genuinely, for all the virtue signalling we do in the world, we ignore this bit of sort of social duty. You know, they want us to be dutiful as citizens, but actually your duty to your children. But I genuinely think people aren't taught it, and the voices of those who defend cohabitation and their right to do this shout much louder now than the voices of the married, who are almost made to feel embarrassed and old-fashioned.
And we ought to say this, Cathy, as well. We talk about cohabitation. Actually, there are large parts of Britain now where cohabitation is suboptimal, but it's a damn sight better than what's going on there, which is a revolving door of occasional partners.
And 3 million children in 2 million lone parent families, which has to count. And every one of those parents, I'm sure, does the best within their own means, but that has to count as a social tragedy. And it's a revolution that's happened in this country over 30-odd years.
Cathy Kinchell, we appreciate you bringing that to us. Thanks very much indeed. We're going to go back to energy and some of your emails. Kevin says, I'm struggling to understand why anybody finds it surprising that costs are rocketing. Are there any examples over the last 50 years where the government of the day has done anything to protect British people being ripped off by big businesses? I think we can probably provide some. Mark says the whole energy crisis just goes to show how utterly useless and powerless our MPs are. Adrian says if the energy companies are making so much money, why don't they just reduce the cost to the consumer? They could avoid a windfall tax that way and help all of us out. We're going to move on to a different story. It is related to the Tory leadership contest. Both candidates have tried to appear, or sound at least, tough on crime to win over the party's members. Liz Truss has pledged to rank the performance of chief constables around the country, whilst Rishi Sunak has promised tougher sentences for those in grooming gangs. Grooming was something which came up yesterday in our debate in Lee. Well, our next guest argues that turning the tide of everyday lawlessness in this country requires really something more profound, a recognition that many crimes in this country effectively go unrecorded, a determination to stop blaming crime on things other than criminals, and an understanding that prison must be used first and foremost as an act of punishment. We're joined by the Mail on Sunday columnist who wrote that, Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
What are you arguing for?
Well, it's very difficult to get it out in sound bites. It's a complete philosophical counter-revolution. In the 1950s and 1960s in this country, we abandoned the idea that crime was committed by people because they had evil intentions, didn't know how to behave, and we instead adopted the idea that people committed crime because of the social conditions they lived in, because their houses were poorly furnished or whatever it was, and because they were poor. This is obviously nonsense, because during the most recent period of profound poverty, hunger and deprivation in our society, namely the 1930s, the level of crime was extraordinarily low. And it's a fatuous claim, but it's widely believed by the left. And it's also to do with the general shying away from the idea of personal responsibility. And from that arose a complete evisceration of all the major features of the criminal justice system. The police were no longer allowed to patrol preventively on the assumption that if you don't patrol preventively, then disorder and crime break out. The courts no longer took crime particularly seriously. And the prisons, instead of being places of austere but well-ordered punishment, became pointless warehouses where people were kept for varying lengths of time. This is the great paradox of this policy, and I strive to get this across, because people say to me, oh, well, surely there are so many people in the prisons, that must mean we're being tough on crime. Let me explain. Please do, because it's so crucial to the whole thing. The idea of prison is that on a second offence, basically, you should go there. If first offenders should be given some latitude, I think everybody. But if someone commits a second crime, then prison is there for it. And prison, when you get there, should be a place of hard work and fairly how shall I put it, austere conditions, not cruelty, not torture, not beatings, but you know you're there. I don't believe in long sentences. That's not the point. And you should encounter it at an early stage in your career of wrongdoing, not merely for your own good, but for the good of other people around you who see what happens to you and who realise that following a career of crime is not a good thing. These days, you probably have to commit about 35 or 40 offences before you go near a prison. And the people who go to prison are already recidivists, they're already long-term repeat offenders, and the chances of it doing them any good are absolutely zero. The other thing is that prisons are no longer under the control of the authorities. They're not places of hard work and austerity. They're places which are largely run by the prisoners themselves, in which nobody can learn anything at all except to be told what to do by.
Well, they learn other things. They learn
horrible places.
They learn how to become better burglars.
But they're horrible in the wrong way.
You talk about personal responsibility in the 1930s. Was that because we were more God-fearing, because people examined their conscience because they believed in God a bit more? Was that
well, certainly that was a large element of it, and that was because that lay underneath the belief in God, which was then common, and the Christianity, which was then common, lay underneath the idea that you should not steal. For instance, people just simply felt that it was wrong. And it was a society in which these things were disapproved of. I think most people disapprove of them now, honestly. I don't think that the public have stopped disapproving of thieving and violence. I think the public still hate thieving, violence, and what is now dismissed by Blairites in nice parts of town as antisocial behaviour, which actually involves people's lives being made total miseries by selfishness and noise and
I recommend people read your piece, because you capture that sense of the stuff that's not appearing in the crime figures, that's not even being treated by the police as crimes. But actually, if you live in some sink estate, not even a sink estate, but somewhere where the policymakers don't live, you see it as an everyday reality.
Yeah. And what's more, there's nothing you can do about it, because if you were to go to the authorities, then you would be treated as what is called a grass and given a very hard time. Your windows go in at the very least. It's impossible to fight against it because these people have been abandoned. It's like the withdrawal of the Roman Empire. It's territories which were used to being orderly and protected have suddenly been left wholly unprotected. Well, not suddenly.
And we're talking about 5% of the country here? What are we talking about? What is it?
I don't know exactly how big a part of the country it is, but there are large parts of major cities where basically the writ of the law does not run. And people know this, and they behave accordingly.
And they've closed down police stations.
Well, police stations have been... I wrote, I think in 2001, for the Mail on Sunday, an article attacking the closure of police stations. And I got a lot of support from people. I remember them writing in and saying, great, nothing happened. They carried on closing them. They carried on closing the police houses in villages. Yeah. The police no longer believe...
Police stations are closing at the rate of one every fortnight.
But police no longer believe they should be present. They, instead of being... The whole point of them was that they were present and visible as individuals on the streets, knowing and respected by the law-abiding and feared by the lawless. They've vanished. And what is it that they do? We know that there are a lot of them because every so often, for various occasions, out they come in huge numbers. Where they stock them and stack them when they're not doing this, I don't know. But most of the time, my basic question is this: if the entire police force of this country was abducted by aliens, how long would it take you to find out? And they just are not there. So they would continue not being there, and you wouldn't know they were any more not there than they are already. Absence is their main feature. They react to crime and disorder after it's happened instead of preventing it. Everybody knows that an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Turning up mob-handed in lots of cars with flashing lights after trouble has begun is useless. And turning up after the simple proposition, I make it again: you cannot unburgle a person who's been burgled. You cannot unmug a person who's been mugged. You cannot, and this is really tragic, especially in London, you cannot unstab a person who's been stabbed. Whatever you do, no amount of police presence later, no amount of heavy sentences later will make any difference. You've got to be there. They've stopped doing it. They don't really believe in doing it anymore. And the courts have been, for years and years, under pressure not to send people to prison, not to take serious action against them, until they absolutely have to. And the result of this, the paradoxical result of this, is we have the fullest prisons we've ever had in our history.
Just say something to the police officer who may be watching, thinking, hang on a minute, Peter Hitchens, I turned up in a police car last night responding to a brawl on the high street because everybody was drunk outside the pub, and I got filled in, and I get filled in maybe once a year.
You know,
it's horrible.
We do have tens of thousands of police officers who remain very committed to the oaths they've taken.
Maybe we do, but we have far more police than we used to have in the days when the job was done properly. If the police who are encountering these horrible circumstances, and I would point out, by the way, that even journalists sometimes get hurt in the course of their duties, so that it doesn't necessarily give you a free pass, that sometimes things go wrong for you. But if the police had actually done what I recommend and what Robert Peel recommended, which is to be on the streets as individuals, getting to know the public, and being out there where they learnt what was going on, these events which they have to rush to where they're in danger would not happen half so much. And another thing, if they would only prosecute, and if the courts would only punish particularly drug offences, and the drug offences play a huge part in this violence, there would be a lot less of it.
Ed Hitchens, we appreciate you coming in. Strong views, and I'm sure they'll elicit some response from our emailers, and also some emails on Cathy Gingell's monologue as well. Lots of you writing in about that. Peter Hitchens, thanks very much indeed for your time. 5 to 5, it's that time, nearly. At 5, the boss of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, has said the era of buying a flight for less than a tenner is over. The budget airline's average fare will rise to over £40 over the next 5 years because of the soaring cost of fuel, he says. At 4, a chat bot on Meta, the owner of Facebook, has claimed the company's chief exec and founder Mark Zuckerberg exploits its users for money. There's a thought, who would have thunk it? The programme learns its language from large amounts of publicly available language data to create its own thoughts. Meta accepted that the prototype can say the wrong thing and mimic language that could be, quote, unsafe, biased or offensive. At 3, a wanted car thief has been found by police hiding in a giant teddy bear. Greater Manchester Police noticed the cuddly toy seemed to be breathing as they searched the man's home and found him inside. At 2, the last person living on Britain's loneliest street, so runs the headline, has refused to leave his council flat. This is Nick Wisniewski, there you go. The last person living in a 4-storey block of flats in North Lanarkshire, refusing to leave ahead of a scheduled demolition. The council's offered him £35,000 plus 2 years' rent somewhere else, should he move, but he still won't leave. And at 1, villagers in Gloucestershire have set up fake speed cameras. This has happened elsewhere, and it's great. And they've set up a fake speed camera in an effort to stop drivers tearing past their homes at up to 80 miles per hour. Residents in Sherdington, Gloucestershire, said the fake camera triggered a noticeable fall in the number of speeding cars. 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock. Cathy Gingell, 45 seconds. What caught your ear?
Oh, that one. It's a good news story, and that's people sort of taking responsibility and doing something. And it shows, actually, funnily enough, if people assert themselves like that, you probably don't need a massive, great state intervention of huge costs and a lot of bureaucrats measuring the road and doing this, that and the other. They did the common sense thing. Good for them. I think it's a terrific story. Unfortunately, everybody now knows the village and they'll know they're fake.
Oh, no, they won't, because that assumes everyone's watching GB News, and only about 95% probably do that, as you know. I mean, this story does come up again and again, people erecting these fake yellow boxes to fool motorists, and the police will come along and say, you mustn't do this. Yeah. And you think, well,
why shouldn't
it's an unfair exchange. You get these beautiful picture postcard villages through which
people rule.
The traffic is destroyed these communities, and I think if they get, if they can fight back,
it's simply dangerous. I mean, it really is dangerous with kids and a road going through a village street. So good on them.
Good on them. Cathy Gingell, thanks very much indeed. Much more from Cathy throughout the course of the next hour, and all the rest of the day's news coming up too. Do stay with us.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. The Met Office amber extreme heat warning is in place until the end of Sunday, where we've got the warning. Temperatures could reach the mid-30s in places over the next few days, and it's the number of days with high temperatures at night that could cause health issues. But it's going to be fairly warm right across the UK again tomorrow. The main exception being northern Scotland, where we do have this weather front bringing cloud and rain through this evening, just trickling into the mainland, so across parts of the Highlands. But elsewhere further south, it's a dry, fine, balmy summer's evening, leading into a largely clear night. Might just turn a little misty once more across parts of eastern England. Temperatures, well, in some rural spots across the north could dip down to single figures, but for most it is a pretty warm night. It's going to be fairly difficult for sleeping once more, particularly staying warm well into the evening. and it's going to be another hot one tomorrow as well. Again, there will be thicker cloud across northern Scotland with some patchy rain, but I suspect the Highlands and the Western Isles will be drier and brighter than today, and a touch warmer too. There will be some mist and low cloud just clinging to parts of the coast across the northeast, and it will be cooler by the sea here, but elsewhere it's going to be hotter than today. 34, 35 likely across parts of the south. We might even hit 36 Celsius. During Friday evening, again, it's a balmy summer's evening, staying quite murky across the coasts of the northeast. A bit more of that low cloud around as we head into Saturday. Still the thicker cloud in the far north with that weather front bringing a bit of patchy rain to Shetland. But again, for the majority, Saturday is another blue sky day with lots of hot sunshine and temperatures more widely into the low 30s and possibly up into the mid 30s once more across parts of the south, where again we're likely to top out at 35 or maybe 36 Celsius. Again, the coast in the northeast will be a little bit cooler. As for the outlook, well, we are looking at potentially a bit of a change. Hot and sunny on Sunday, but this low will bring some showers next week.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, hi there and welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson urging power companies to act in the national interest to ease pressure on households facing rising bills. There are forecasts that are predicting average annual energy costs could rise to over 4,200 quid by January. Also reports of possible blackouts as the UK potentially faces having to ration electricity. Last happened in the 1970s. We ask, are there any upsides to the energy crunch? Might this be the jolt some households need to use less energy and be more environmentally conscious? Also, an investigation by the consumer group Which has revealed illegal weapons are being sold on online stores for as little as 49p. Zombie knives, knuckle dusters and swords among the items available through third-party sellers. Reaction with former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley. And should expats have the same voting rights as everyone in the UK who can vote? Gina Miller, who led the legal action against Boris Johnson's Brexit prorogation in 2019, now leads the True and Fair party, says there should be a minister for expats to stop them being what she calls second-class citizens. Should people living abroad have the same say on decisions in the UK as people who live here all the time? With me for the next hour, the editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell, who's just delivered a fantastic monologue which you'll be able to see online. I recommend it. But first, the latest news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. Coming up to 2 minutes past 5, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting that the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. The Chancellor says the government will continue to evaluate the extraordinary profits being made in certain parts of the sector and consider what steps to take. Tory leadership contender Liz Truss has hinted she would consider further support for struggling households if she becomes Prime Minister. She made the comments during the People's Forum on GB News, having previously taken a hard stance on so-called handouts. The Foreign Secretary and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak will address Tory party members at a hustings in Cheltenham this evening. Former leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith supports Liz Truss's approach.
What you want to do is to make sure, and she said this, any support we give must be properly targeted and measured against those who need it most, so that those people can get the support that they need, rather than just scattering it across a whole income range right the way up to people like you and me who are going to receive more money later on in October, when you could argue that we're not the ones in need, it's those in need who are facing difficulties with their bills. So targeted support is what she's talking about, properly measured and also funded.
As we've been hearing in the last half hour, a 39-year-old man has been charged following incidents in Skye and Wester Ross, which left one man dead and 3 people injured. John McKinnon was killed as a gunman targeted a number of properties in the area. His family released a statement describing him as a loving husband and father of 6. The suspect is due to appear at Inverness Sheriff Court on Friday. In news just in, legal advisers and court associates working in magistrates' courts in England and Wales have voted to strike. The Public and Commercial Services Union says its members voted to walk out by 9-1 in a dispute over a new case management system. The union says 180 of its members are involved in the row, and industrial action will be significant, targeted and sustained. A man who was allegedly part of the IS terror cell known as the Beatles has been remanded in custody. Ain Davis was arrested at Luton Airport after being deported from Turkey, where he was serving a prison sentence. The 38-year-old from West London appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court, charged with terrorism offences. He will now appear at the Old Bailey next month. A car has hit 5 people in Kent, killing 2 members of the same family and seriously injuring a child. Police say a man in his 80s and a woman in her 30s died after being hit outside a multi-storey car park in Ramsgate. A local man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and leaving the scene of a collision. Ryan Giggs' ex-girlfriend has told a court she's hugely ashamed that she kept going back to the former Manchester United player who promised the world. The 48-year-old is on trial accused of controlling and coercive behaviour, as well as assault against Kate Greville. Asked why she moved into his home if he'd been a serial and violent abuser, she said the cycle of abuse made her feel insecure. Giggs is also accused of assaulting her sister. He denies all the charges against him. 26 countries have pledged more than £1.2 billion in aid to boost Ukraine's military defence against Russia. The UK has also promised to send more weapons, including multiple launch rocket systems and precision-guided missiles. Speaking at an event in Copenhagen, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the aid is designed to help Ukraine win the war.
We have come out of this meeting with more pledges of finance, more pledges of training and more pledges of military aid, all designed to help Ukraine win, to help Ukraine stand up for its sovereignty, and indeed to ensure that President Putin's ambitions fail in Ukraine, as they rightly should.
Water industry insiders say they expect an official drought to be declared tomorrow. An amber heat warning is currently in place. The risk of wildfires is exceptional across parts of England and Wales for the next few days. Met Office has raised its fire severity index to its highest level following the prolonged dry conditions. Temperatures are set to reach 36 degrees on Saturday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Colin Brazier.
It's 7 minutes past 5. We're going to start again with energy. Make no apologies for that. It's something that is getting a lot of you exercised online and elsewhere. Boris Johnson appealing to electricity companies today to act in the national interest to help ease the pressure on consumers in the face of these soaring energy prices. Ministers met with the bosses of the UK's energy giants earlier. Analysts had been warning that average annual household energy bills, as you know, were set to top at least 4,200. It's a mind-boggling figure, obviously, come the start of next year. Shell and BP, they are paying those 25% windfall tax on profits, aren't they? But they did also make combined profits of nearly £30 billion in the first half of the year. Their representatives didn't participate in these Downing Street conversations. But also this week, a warning of possible blackouts this winter. Britain potentially facing having to ration electricity, even unto turning off power for periods of the day. It was last seen in Britain, as some of you will remember, in the 1970s, early 1970s. But here's a question, it's not been posed by us at least over recent weeks, and there'll be some people feeling it's wholly inappropriate, but we'll put it anyway. Could cutting down our usage actually be a good thing? So reducing the amount of electricity we're using because it's simply so expensive actually be something which is environmentally useful in the long term? Is it the jolt that's needed to change behaviour? The energy commentator, Jamie Delage, joins me now. Jamie, welcome to you. We were talking in our meeting earlier about whether this is even a topic that can be ventilated. Of course it is, isn't it? Of course, this idea that sometimes the medicine is so uncomfortable to take, but it actually yields something positive. Just enlarge on that point for me, if you would.
Yeah, of course we can do something. We can do something both to reduce the risk of a blackout and also cut some of those very high prices we're seeing. And that's if people are persuaded to not necessarily cut out completely their usage, but to displace it, to move it to another time. And for example, not to switch on their cookers at a peak period, because it's during the peak period that you're seeing the highest prices. During the peak period, you're likely to see the risk of a blackout. So, and this is, asking, ordinary consumers to do this is nothing more than simply getting them to do what companies do. There's unfortunately this horrible jargon, and it's called, these are demand side units. And what that means is you get a number of businesses together. They could do it singly, but usually it's together, and someone coordinates their actions. And on an instruction from, this happens over here in Northern Ireland or in Ireland, an instruction from the grid operator, they reduce their consumption. They might cut it out. They might switch off refrigerators, switch off machines, and they're rewarded for doing that. And that would probably typically take place at times of high demand. So what we could do is something similar, and get, as long as we're rewarded for it.
Yeah, OK. And Jamie, people get that, don't they? And at what point is it sort of, it's almost become, that we can talk about. No sensitivities around that. People get that. They've got the agency. They get to reduce their usage, perhaps using the monitors we all now have showing us how much energy we're using. At what point does it become bad manners, as I think it almost has done, for an energy provider? And a couple of them fell into this tiger trap in the early days, and they said, well, come the winter, maybe put an extra pullover on, put an extra sweater on, turn the central heating down. And they was yelled down. Of course they were yelled down by people saying, people will die this winter. This is you're being frivolous. We get all that. Of course we get all that. But actually, there surely is something about changing behaviour which yields results, positive results for the planet, because we are reducing our energy consumption. We don't want to do it. It's costing us a fortune. But you see the distinction that somehow this conversation has been circumscribed, and saying something about certain things, put a jumper on, has become impossible.
Yeah, but I don't think it has to be framed in terms of a hair shirt policy. You can incentivize people. Companies are incentivized to do it, as I was saying, and consumers likewise. There has been an experiment conducted by National Grid and Octopus, which involved something like 100,000 people. Took place in February and March earlier this year, and it was incentivizing people to reduce their using during certain windows, 2-hour windows. And I haven't seen the results of that. I don't know where they're published. I haven't seen the results, but that will inform That will inform sort of the powers that be as to whether really you can do these things at scale. Because it's really no good if you, Colin, and me, Jamie, switch off in a spirit of trying to help the environment, switch off our cooker at a particular time. A lot of people have got to do it, and the only way I think you're going to see that happening is because they get some financial incentive.
Yes,
and that's
they've got to get money back.
Working
Got it. You appeal to people's financial self-interest. We've got about 45 seconds left, Jamie. Will there be power blackouts in the UK this winter?
Well, we have to see that being a possibility. Where there are problems in Norway, that people are in Norway as a supplier to us of electricity. The French nuclear fleet is having problems. So there always is the possibility. And I mean, I think we have to prepare for the possibility of it. Probably it won't happen, but look, my guess is as good as anybody else's. I think that if it's well enough managed and we take enough precautions and we do enough sensible things, we can sidestep forced blackouts.
Jamie Delargy, appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Cathy Kingel's alongside me. Jamie there was mentioning the French nuclear fleet. You think you've got everything planned. I mean, the French produce about 70% of their electricity from nuclear power stations. I mean, they're way ahead of other people. But the waters are so low in the rivers, they can't cool the plants. And they've also had some engineering works they've had to do. And their nuclear production of electricity is right down.
Yeah.
Countries have just been unlucky a little bit at the moment.
OK, but really what you're suggesting is absolutely outrageous, that you're going to tell people, you're going to do the sage type of nudge policy, where we're going to dictate to the population when you can put your kettle on to boil your cup of tea. This is fine with the wealthy upper classes, who've got everything they want whenever they want. It's the poor people. What about the old lady who's cold who wants to make her cup of tea? I find this an absolutely outrageous interventionist policy, which is only really happening. I mean, I see your example about the French nuclear cooling, but fundamentally, this is a product of really poor policy over years. And the fact is, consumption has dropped of energy over years. It's already dropped. How much more do you want it to drop? Do you want there to be no energy industry? So I'm really sceptical about it. And I find it really annoying to be told when I can switch on a light or not, or when my kid can do their homework by light. This is wrong.
We had a conversation yesterday. Who was in? Kelvin Mackenzie was in. There are some people now. I mean, are we saying that the right to turn the kettle on, the right to turn a light on, is something the government must underwrite? There's a view at large now that the government has to. Every single mishap in your life, the government's on the hook for it. Where's personal responsibility?
This is the price we pay for everybody saying, even to Liz Truss, what are you going to do about it? What's the government going to do about it? It's a whole ethos now that the government's meant to fix everything. Well, the government tends to fix everything very badly. That's that famous Ronald Reagan quote. What do you remember? You'll probably remember. I've now forgotten it. The man coming, the worst thing you hear, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. No, you mainly don't help us. And micromanaging our lives with outfits like Sage, which has caused so much destruction in this country, is really not the way to go. I don't want the government micromanaging my life, and no self-respecting citizen should. And, get their basic energy policies realistic and bring some rationality back into it, and this wouldn't have to happen.
Cathy, thanks very much indeed.
Sorry, I've given another monologue.
Really got the bit between your teeth today, crikey. And now, with less than a month to go until the new leader of the Conservative Party and this country's Prime Minister is decided by Tory members, Liz Truss, right about this time yesterday, wasn't it, appeared on GBNews to take questions from the public on key policy areas. It was our People's Forum in Lee, Greater Manchester. There, the Foreign Secretary spoke about, amongst other things, immigration, pledging to stop the European Court of Human Rights from blocking flights to Rwanda.
I would do, if I'm elected as your Prime Minister, is make the Rwanda policy work through the British Bill of Rights, ensuring that we can't be overruled by the ECHR. Because that's been a problem, that we had the ruling from the ECHR and that stopped the policy going ahead. So I would make sure we legislate for Britain that we are in control of our own policy and we can't be overruled by the ECHR.
And on tax, Liz Truss confirming the rise in national insurance would, under her premiership, be revoked, but there was some ambiguity as to when it would happen.
I would reverse the national insurance rise, and I'd also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy. So from day one, families are keeping more of their own money. I will get it in as soon as possible. But
that's not day one. That's as soon as possible.
I will act on day one to make it happen as soon as possible, but it will happen well before April.
Well, Rishi Sunak has said he would rather lose the Conservative leadership race than win on a false premise. The former Chancellor said he would tell people what they needed to hear and stay true to his values. Let's turn to my fellow GB News presenter, Calvin Robinson, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, who joins us now. Calvin, a very warm welcome to you. I know there'll be those people who are saying, well, you're blowing your own trumpet on behalf of GB News, but I thought there was something really refreshing about the People's Forum that was happening this time yesterday, not least just seeing a succession of people, quotes, ordinary members of the public taking to the microphone and articulating some deep-seated misgivings they have about the direction the country's taking.
Absolutely. It's the GB News motto, isn't it? Asking the questions you want answered. And this was one of those rare occasions where we were able to let the common public, the common man, put the question to the elite. And I think that's fantastic. A lot of other channels didn't do that. I think there were some good topics discussed. We just heard a clip there about the ECHR overriding British politics, and I think that's an important one to talk about, because I think we do need a British Bill of Rights, but it needs to centre on the individual, it needs to centre on people and not the government. And that is where it could get tricky, because we don't want the European courts to overrule the British government in terms of when we can expedite illegal immigrants. But of course, we also don't want the British government to override the individual rights of British people, British subjects. That's important too. So of course, as long as the person comes above the government, I'm happy to see us removing ourselves from the ECHR.
Calvin, I think I'm right in saying you've just been in the United States, where I imagine there's not much attention, if any, really directed towards this Conservative leadership contest. There will, of course, in time be interest in who our Prime Minister is. But just if you can, draw some distinctions between the way we do politics here and the way politics is done in the US. Because I know people look at events like last night and they see something that's beginning to resemble more of a presidential race with all the fluff that goes with that. But there are still profound differences.
Absolutely. I was in Canada, not the US, so people are going to be unhappy to hear you say that. But I will talk about the US because it's very important what's happening right now. Donald Trump, the former president, has... he's been persecuted in all sense of the word. He's got the FBI investigating and raiding his private residence, which is unprecedented for a president sitting or former. He's got the IRS looking into his tax returns because they've always had an eye on his taxes as a route to get to him. And then, of course, they tried to impeach him a couple of times. They are so petrified. And when I say they, I mean the deep state. I don't just mean the Democratic Party. I mean Barack Obama is still involved, people who were lawyers for Jeffrey Epstein. There's a deep rot in American politics based around corruption and money, and they do not want to see Donald Trump back in office. So they're doing anything they can to get him out, get rid of him as an opponent, which I think actually is going to help his chances more than anything. It's a great shame to see them fall to this level, really, because democracy is one of the key American values.
Calvin Robinson. Calvin, appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Cathy Kinjal alongside me. Calvin's using that phrase. It was used by Boris Johnson a month ago. It was used more recently by others. The deep state. First time I heard it, certainly out of the mouth of Boris Johnson, I was surprised. It sort of conjures up conspiracy theory stuff. Does it exist?
Well, something exists in the USA, but it possibly also exists here in the sense of certain bureaucrats with vested interests in certain departments.
We used to call it the establishment, didn't we?
Well, yes, possibly, but there's the establishment and there's the slightly behind establishment. I don't think I think Donald Trump was right. He had to clear the swamp, and he didn't have quite long enough to clear the swamp when he got in. And as soon as he came in, the swamp was attacking him so hard, as Calvin, and now that they're repeating it again. So I think there is something evident in America that probably is a bit corrupt and worrying. And you're certainly seeing it with Biden's interests in China. And I think the Democrats are sort of a pretty nasty party historically.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just have a look at some emails, shall we? this one on marriage. Kathy Kinchel had a strong monologue that's really got a lot of you writing in. Jim says, Kathy, 36 years into marriage, and it's great. Kids all producing babies and life is wonderful. Seeing the wee ones, highly recommend it. Russell says, the nuclear family is the foundation of society. I would be nothing without my wonderful wife and children. Terry says, I'm a Conservative, was married, but due to working 100 hours a week, pushed by Conservative way of thinking, we divorced. My children now get more of my time than before, and they are always listened to. Jean says, Kathy put her thoughts beautifully. My marriage lasted almost 62 years, and my darling husband, Ken, sadly died exactly 8 years ago with Alzheimer's. We married in 1953. Ration books were still around, and life was pretty hard at times. Pulling together as a team and deeply in love. It was a great adventure, a son and daughter who learned our work ethic, did well at school and further, one becoming a teacher and one a vet. Lucy, never a true word spoken. Most of our social ills are because of the decline in normal family life. Do have a look at Kathy's monologue. It's online. If not now, then very shortly. And she's here to ponder on her reaction to some of those emails. There was a point saying, actually, for one individual, that actually his life got better when he wasn't married.
Well, I'm sure that does happen. Did his children's life get better? We don't know. And children, probably grown-up children, aren't going to be that cruel to their parents and say kids have to get up and grow on and let things go. Obviously, you can't spend your life blaming your parents for everything. But I thought some of those were very moving. And I think it is the teamwork in marriage and having somebody there. And I think one thing that's really ignored is how much men have suffered by not being married. I've been really attacked by a big group of men at a conference once for saying that marriage ultimately socialises men. But men need to be socialised because, again, when you look at all those breakdown statistics, more male suicides, more men in crime, most of these things are happening to unmarried men. If you divide out the married men between the unmarried men, the married men stay on a more even keel and become less marginalised.
But I mean, in a world now where it's as much of a rite of passage to turn 18 and get an account on Tinder than it is to get married, we understand why men are commitment phobes, don't we? They get access to as much sex as they want without being married.
Well, yes, exactly. And so, we need sort of quite stronger moral teaching from parents. I mean, we all know when we're young, we all know we pushed against every rule that was put on us. But I have to say, I had to turn up. Whenever I went out, the age of 18, when I came in, my parents were sitting up for me, bolt upright in bed, and say, Kathy, come in here. And, just look to see how flush my cheeks were or whatever, to know what I might have been up to. They put the fear of hell into me. Was it a bad thing? Now I think I really thank them for it.
Kathy, thanks very much indeed. Interesting thoughts. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, illegal weapons can be bought online for as little as 49p. This is according to an investigation from the consumer group Which. It found zombie knives, knuckle dusters, even swords being sold through third-party vendors. We'll speak to the former Metropolitan Police Officer, Peter Blexley. That's next.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, the consumer group Which, it's found that banned weapons are still on sale on sites like eBay, Amazon for as little as 49p. Anyone found with an illegal weapon or selling one can face up to 4 years in prison as well as an unlimited fine. But a Which investigation raised concerns over how the internet stores monitor listings by third parties, weapons such as knuckle dusters, flick knives. All this as the country faces high rates of knife crime, obviously. After being alerted by Which, Amazon, eBay and AliExpress all said they had removed all the listings. The former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Blexley is here in the studio with us now. Peter Blexley, thanks for coming in, appreciate it. I mean, we've got to have a little bit of sympathy, I suppose, for these big online retailers because there are presumably tens of thousands of items listed every week and keeping across all of it's tough.
I don't have any sympathy for them whatsoever. After this fantastic piece of work by Which is very important, highlighted this, and they contacted these retailers, whether it be Amazon or eBay or some of the other retailers that sit on foreign platforms hosted by different countries in different territories, all of a sudden they were able to say, well, our algorithms have identified some flaws and we're attending to those. These companies have the algorithms that could flag these items up immediately. And if they don't have them, then they should have them. They have the right to sell freely online. And of course, they're a volume business, so they want to do as much retail as they can. If they have that right to sell, they have the responsibility to ensure that these weapons that could take lives are not available.
A kitchen knife can take a life, though, can't it? Why should we be so worried about something that looks intimidating, but actually it's no more lethal than a kitchen knife that you can buy without a problem?
No, some of these weapons are actually designed to cause maximum damage when they enter the body of a beast or a human being. They're designed to cause as much carnage as they can, and sadly, they often do.
Kathy, you were going to
Well, I went recently into a major shop, the name of which everybody will know, and found you can't buy a knife there. And if you go along the wall, you've seen this, so all the empty packets, and you're meant to take down some details without knowing what, or look it up on your phone and online or whatever, and then go to the counter, and then they sort of dig it out from deep storage for you. This is a very, very well-known, what do you call it, chain.
Yeah.
I think the banning thing has sort of gone mad. When I see pictures like that one and what you're saying, you think, yes, that's the right end to attack. But actually, it still is, the banning is the wrong end of the process. Number one, go back to Peter, why aren't we deterring more? You know, why aren't we prosecuting more? Why aren't we catching more? Why aren't people realising it's not worth their while to do knife crime? And instead what you have is this other end of preventative knife sweeps, banning, but it doesn't ever solve the problem, does it?
Well, the problems connected to knife crime are complex, they are multiple, and clearly there are no easy solutions, or else they would have been applied by now. But I take complete issue with what you say about the retailers. Those retailers, if they stop the sale of just one knife that was intended to do harm with from a young person, then I really don't mind about the inconvenience that you, I, or any other shopper may face. Get them off the shelves. Do not allow them to be in a position where they can be stolen, shoplifted, or they can be purchased by people who have got evil intent. Too many lives have been lost.
Peter Blexley, we had Peter Hitchens sitting where you are half an hour ago. He wrote a piece in the Daily Mail in which he says, everyday crime now is just taken for granted. by politicians in particular. There's a level of, in certain parts of our country, there is a level of crime which seriously reduces the quality of people's lives, and the police are powerless to do anything about it, or sometimes won't even do something about it. Do you recognise that depiction of crime in Britain today?
I watched what Mr Hitchens said with considerable interest. Some of it I agree with, other parts I vehemently opposed. But yes, on today of all days, when a report has been published detailing catastrophically low clear-up rates for burglary, theft, robbery. They are a stain on British policing, which in so many aspects finds itself in crisis. We, the public, should expect more, we should get more, we actually deserve better. But policing has got itself in such a tangle, predominantly because it doesn't actually do a lot of policing these days. Officers are spending so much of their time dealing with mental health issues, missing persons who may harm themselves, nothing to do with crime. And policing got itself in a huge tangle about 25 years or so ago when it decided that all our officers should get degrees. Certainly the ones with ambition who wanted to climb that greasy pole. So they went off to the great seats of learning in Oxford and Cambridge, and they came back full of pseudo-intellectual claptrap, which they applied to policing where it had no place.
So Ian Blair.
We find ourselves where we're at.
Yeah. Peter Bleksley, enjoyed that. Thanks very much indeed for your thoughts. Coming up, China's population has collapsed. Its population growth has collapsed from 8 million newborns per year a decade ago to less than 500,000 last year. Why? We'll discuss that.
It's 5:33. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting that the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. The 39-year-old man has been charged following incidents in Skye and west of Ross, which left one man dead and 3 people injured. John McKinnon was killed as a gunman targeted a number of properties in the area. His family released a statement describing him as a loving husband and father of 6. The suspect is due to appear at Inverness Sheriff Court on Friday. A man who was allegedly part of the IS terror cell known as the Beatles has been remanded in custody. Ain Davis was arrested at Luton Airport after being deported from Turkey, where he was serving a prison sentence. The 38-year-old from West London is charged with terrorism offences and will appear at the Old Bailey next month. A car has hit 5 people in Kent, killing 2 members of the same family and seriously injuring a child. Police say a man in his 80s and a woman in her 30s died after being hit outside a multi-storey car park in Ramsgate. A local man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and leaving the scene of a collision. Water industry insiders say they expect an official drought will be declared tomorrow. An amber heat warning is currently in place, and the risk of wildfires is exceptional across parts of England and Wales for the next few days. The Met Office raised its fire severity index to its highest level following the prolonged dry conditions, with temperatures set to hit 36 degrees on Saturday. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back in just a moment to Colin Brazier.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.222 and 1.182 euros. The price of gold currently standing at £1,465, 83 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Hey!
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, last week, the West looked nervously on to Taiwan as the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the country despite China's protestations urging her not to be there. There is a fear that China, which many see as the soon-to-be most powerful country economically and in terms of defence in the world, would resort to military action. But my next guest thinks there is a threat to China's desire for global dominance, and it may be surprising to you. It's collapsing birth rate. Joining me now, Professor of History and Politics, Modern China at Oxford University, Rihanna Mitter. Rihanna Mitter, welcome to you. Fascinating piece in The Spectator last week, which threw up some new concepts to me, I have to say. This sort of nihilism, really, amongst young Chinese, that they just don't want to play by the rules set for them anymore. And one of the rules is that they have children and take a job, and they want to do neither.
That's right, Colin. One of the most fascinating things, if you read Chinese, is looking at Chinese social media, the equivalents of Twitter and similar institutions, which of course are not allowed in China, but they have their own Chinese versions, Weibo. And what you hear there is slogans from younger people, which actually suggest a great deal of disillusionment with the way in which they're being encouraged to work all hours God sends. The phrase that's often used there about that is 996, which stands for start work at 9 in the morning, finish 9 at night, and work 6 days a week. And pushing back against that, a lot of people, young people, men and women on social media, are saying things like, well, actually, we just want to lie flat. That's a Chinese phrase that's often used, meaning, in other words, just, stay, relaxing, not getting caught up with the rat race. That's often not what people think about in terms of China, because, of course, there's this very strong nationalistic element, which we've seen in the discussion of the Taiwan affair last week with the visit of Speaker Pelosi. But that element of youth disillusionment is really real, is really important.
And how does that feed in, if at all, rather, to the demographic argument? I mean, just we rewind, we think back to 1979, the institution of the enforced one-child policy. I mean, much reversing ferrets in recent years from the Chinese Communist Party on that. They realised they overcooked it. And they're finding, actually, it's tremendously difficult, isn't it? If you've got, the four grandparents, the two children, the little emperor, at the bottom of that inverted pyramid. If you're used to all that attention from the four grandparents and the two parents, actually the idea of sharing any of those resources and that attention with maybe a child or two turns out not to be very appealing.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I'm sure viewers will know, but just to remind you that there was a one-child policy enforced, not on everyone, but most people in China from the late 1970s to the mid-2010s. That's now pretty much been abolished. And in fact, the Chinese state is going the other way, saying you should have more children. But I think one of the primary reasons that actually young Chinese are not getting married and having many children these days, either not more than one or in some cases none at all, is actually to do with the constraints of a very expensive property market. Now, GB viewers are mostly going to be here in the UK, and you'll know that we've had a problem in terms of young couples getting married and getting on the property market for years. Well, the same is true in China. People talk about becoming, the expression is mortgage slaves, and quite often they can't find an apartment in one of the big cities, Shanghai, Chongqing, Beijing, in which there's actually space to bring up more than one child. So when the state is saying it's time to actually have more children for the sake of China, a lot of people on that social media I mentioned are saying things like, well, where are we supposed to put them? How are we going to pay for tutoring? How are we going to actually afford the childcare that's needed so that a woman can work and actually bring in an income at the same time as actually bringing up one child or two or three? These are questions to which the Chinese state hasn't yet come up with a really good answer. And that's what's really affecting young people's willingness to have children.
And the first country, the first big country that will get old before it gets rich, if I can put it that way.
Well, if we go on a linear line from where we are now, Colin, yes, then it may be the case that China essentially ends up being in a situation, if you extrapolate from where the latest United Nations population figures say that China will be at the end of this century, it would mean that for every 100 working age Chinese, there would be 120 pensioners and retirees for them to look after, which is really not sustainable. But I think it's worth saying that there are some things that push in the other direction, just to make it clear this isn't inevitable. One is that China's doing one thing that actually maybe we should pay attention to, and they're spending 2.4% of their GDP overall, private and public sector, on research, development, technology, and education. Now, what they're using it for is not always something that we in the West would necessarily like, but that's a lot of investment in education that may make a difference. One other element that's worth noting as well is that they may well increase pension ages. Right now, one of the few countries that has a similar pension age to China is France, where you can actually retire even in your 50s in some cases. And that's true in China too, particularly for blue-collar workers. If they move the pension age up to 60, it will make the pension crisis more sustainable, but might mean that even in authoritarian China, you get demonstrations and anger from older people who say we paid into our pensions and we're not getting our money. So there are risks for the Chinese government.
And they'll look across the border to Russia and they'll see about some of the protests that resulted in exactly the same measure of raising the pensionable age. Rihanna Mitter, absolutely fascinating. I recommend people take a look at your piece in The Spectator. Really good read. Thanks for your time. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
There. Well, Cathy Kingill, just briefly, Cathy, on that.
Well, what the outcome of such a totalitarian policy? This is an example of real sort of dystopia, isn't it? And now they're not going to. It's an extraordinary drop in the number of children. But we're seeing it here. Young people don't want to have children. Everything's too expensive. The consumer value is higher. That's what I said. You know, the mobile phone contract's more important than the marriage contract or having the baby.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's it. That's it. It's sad.
Thanks very much, Cathy. We're going to move on. The UK is again in the midst of a rolling heat wave. There are several themes we can associate with the hot British summer, stereotypes perhaps. People find themselves outside of their usual temperature ranges, crikey, and different rules apply. We saw that at the top of the last hour when our guest turned up in a very skimpy pair of jeans, didn't she, Cathy?
Shorts.
Oh, no, we didn't. We
tried to hide them.
You couldn't see them on the telly. So why do we Brits often feel the heat more than most? Is that even true? Let's turn to the comedian, Patrick Monaghan. Patrick, who's in Edinburgh at the moment for the festival. Patrick, welcome to you. How well do we cope with the heat?
Oh, I tell you what. Well, I'm in the hotbed here, as you mentioned there, Edinburgh Festival. It's in Scotland. We're hitting a proper heat wave here. It's about 17 degrees. Half the Scottish people have evaporated. That's how hot it is. So it's, but it's great though, because look, we are a nation that we don't need any excuse, do we, to get outside as soon as it's hot. I mean, here's some classic examples. If we look at the first one here, you've got the dangers of going outside. Remember, it's roasting hot out there. So what do people do? Colin, we're this generation, aren't we, where people can't leave the house without their phone. They can't leave the house without a couple of objects. And I always say to people, if you are going to go outside with your mobile phone, please please put it somewhere else. And put your mobile phone on its own deck chair. Don't leave it on you, because a lot of people are, unless you're trying to save money from going to a tattoo parlor and you're thinking, do you know what, I'd love to get a tattoo of my iPhone on my chest. The only benefit is sleep with it on your chest. There is no benefit whatsoever. I mean, this guy here, I am surprised this guy here didn't explode with that iPhone, because you know what it's like. If you've got a smartphone, they last about 3 seconds in the sunshine before they start to disintegrate. So the next thing as well, let's remember, what are the other dangers? When you're going outside, Colin, when anyone's going outside, remember the outside spaces are used by other things and animals that have it for the rest of the year, 24 hours a day. Seagulls are your biggest enemies, your friends. I mean, look, what do people do? We go outside, we go, right, it's hot. What's the first thing we do? We'll get some fish and chips. Now, remember, you're not going to be eating them chips on your own. So this is the rule that I always use, right? Always buy 2 portions of chips. If it's just you have 2 portions, one for you, one for the seagull. That's what you do. Listen, I grew up in Teesside in Redcar, and it was normally, the seagulls are massive. The seagulls are bigger than the people. So maybe buy 3 or 4 portions of chips and just throw them around just to keep you safe. Now, what is the other biggest thing that happens when we have a heat wave? Well, let me tell you, Colin, I don't know what it is. I think it's like a subliminal advice that somehow people think that, okay, it's hot. What's the first thing we do? Let's go to the beach and sit with another 65,000 people in a confined space that would be the size of a sports hall. I mean, why would you not want to do that? Why would you not want to sit with 65,000 people sweating to death, splashing on sun lotion that not only is getting in their eyes, it's getting in your eyes and every orifice of your body? And also, why would you not want to lay on a beach trying to relax while other people are throwing empty cans of lager across your head and having arguments with their spouses about, it's too hot. Well, at least, we don't have to put the electricity on. So people are arguing, but you can enjoy all of that space. And finally, Colin, I mean, look, we cannot mention the great British heat wave without mentioning the absolute fantastic stuff it does for charity. Because every July and August, I don't know if you know this, but charity shops get about 90% of our clothes. So if you see all this, if you have a look at this picture now, you'll see that people in the UK have no clothes during the months of July, August and September. I mean, look at these. This is a classic example of these people here. They've just been to their local Marie Curie charity shop. They've dropped all the clothes.
I'll tell you what they haven't done, Patrick. They haven't just been to the gym.
Yeah. I know that. I think he's my personal trainer, to be honest. I think that I want to get that. I want to get my money back. I've been wasting too much money. But do you know what I love, Colin? Look, he's kept the hat and the sunglasses as if that's like to try and go, I better cover myself up just in case someone from the street recognises me. But he's just kept his trousers on. I mean, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, what I love about this is the fact that the rest of the world must be looking at the UK and going, wow, they're getting temperatures of 30, 32 degrees. Imagine if we got temperatures of over 40. People would be walking around with literally nothing on, or just a pair of speakers. We all look like we're in a Rod Stewart video for 3 months. People are like, what is going on?
Patrick, we're going to leave it there. But that's lovely, absolutely lovely.
Yeah, Colin,
Patrick,
I have to admire that you're wearing a full suit with a tie.
Air conditioning, love. Patrick, really nice to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. Patrick Monahan there. Cathy Kinjal.
What a seaside postcard. I mean, honestly, but the Brits are mad at the beach. If you look at the seaside postcards back to the sort of 20s, you can see it all, and the handkerchiefs tied around the head, and the socks and the sandals on all the time. I mean, the Brits are always a bit daft in the sun.
But the knotted hanky's gone, hasn't it?
The knot in the hanky's gone.
No, we're going to move on quickly. A study's found that vegetarian women are significantly more likely to fracture their hips than meat eaters. This is the work of University of Leeds researchers who gathered data from 27,000 women aged 35 to 69 over the best part of 2 decades. So a longitudinal study. They concluded that those with a vegetarian diet were a third, 33%, more likely to suffer a break to the hip. Let's turn to the nutritionist, Kim Pearson, for thoughts on this. Kim Pearson, welcome to you. I mean, you'll get vegetarians who'll say, well, yeah, OK, but if you get the right supplements, this need not be a problem. Is that true?
It is possible to get all of the nutrients you need on a vegetarian diet, but it is a lot harder. So looking at this example of reduced bone density and increased risk of hip fractures, we know that there are certain nutrients in the vegetarian diet that are more likely to be lacking that are important for bone health and bone density. For example, protein. We strongly correlate protein with optimal muscle mass, but it's also really important for bone density as well, and it can be more lacking in a vegetarian diet. There are other nutrients as well. So we commonly think of things like calcium, but magnesium, vitamin D, boron, vitamin K, and even B12. B12 is another one that is commonly lacking in vegetarian and vegan diets. And all of these nutrients are really important for optimal bone health.
Optimal bone health for women, says the study, is impaired by a vegetarian diet. You know, we've got this figure of a third. What is it about the bone structure of women? Just less density? Is it something to do with testosterone? Because if you think about something like osteoporosis and the fragility of bones in older women, what's behind that? Why the gender divide?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that this study, the UK Women's Cohort Study, is just on women. So it's following 35,000 women, as you mentioned at the beginning. So this study is only looking at women. However, there are differences between men and women. When women go through the menopause, they experience a decline in levels of estrogen, and estrogen is quite protective for the bones. So actually, this is one reason why women in sort of later life are more likely to experience increased risk of hip fractures.
It's really interesting. Kim Pearson, appreciate your thoughts today. Thanks very much indeed, Kim Pearson, on that study of women showing that amongst older women, hip fractures were a third more common for women who kept to a vegetarian diet. I thought it was interesting there, Kathy, that Kim was also making the point that not even all the bottles full of supplements will make up the deficit.
Yeah. It's much more difficult to have a really balanced, totally vegetarian diet because you're eliminating fish, you're eliminating milk, you're eliminating meat, you're eliminating chicken. I mean, and you know, how many pulses can you eat? And I don't think I think people eat a lot of pasta and they don't eat a lot of the different variation of pulses and beans and things that have the protein in them because if not more difficult to cook, they're less common in our culture for cooking. It's not like you're in India and have big bowls of dal all the time. So yes, it's not surprising and people need to be aware. But the trouble is, good protein's expensive now.
Another story. Kathy, for now, thanks very much indeed. Up next, it's Michelle Dewberry, and here she is to tell you what's coming up on Dubes & Co.
Hello, Colin. Yes, I'm back in the office. Not in the working man's club anymore. The fun from yesterday is over, but we've got to get straight back to business. Energy bills, it's been estimated now, never mind 4,000, they could even hit 5,000. What are we going to do? Gordon Brown, he's piped up with some suggestions, everything from pausing caps through to potential renationalisation. Ed Davey, he's got some plans. So what are the answers? What should we be doing? Also, get this, £60 million has been spent, or should I say wasted, by the police on Extinction Rebellion protests since 2019. We need to get tougher on protesters, that's what I say. And Donald Trump, he reckons he's subject of a witch hunt. Is he? That's what I'm asking tonight.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Interesting as always. Now, one of the producers of this show, Marta Grigorchuk, has given birth to a baby boy. We're just going to, I think the language, Kathy, now is a shout-out to Marta.
Yeah.
John, there we go, got a picture. John David,
Oh.
born in the early hours of this morning, weighing in at 7.7 pounds. His mother said he is tiny and sleeps well, which is important, Marta, because we need you back here. Get back to work as quickly as you can.
No, Colin, give her a break. You're so mean.
By the way, there we go, lovely picture to end on. But if people want to dwell on an important topic, I strongly recommend they take a look at your wonderful monologue on the merits of marriage today. Do take a look, it's online now. Do send us your thoughts as well. We'll try and get through some of them maybe come the start of next week. Michelle Dewberry is next. Stand by.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. The Met Office amber extreme heat warning is in place until the end of Sunday, where we've got the warning. Temperatures could reach the mid-30s in places over the next few days, and it's the number of days with high temperatures at night that could cause health issues, but it's going to be fairly warm right across the UK again tomorrow. The main exception being northern Scotland, where we do have this weather front bringing cloud and rain through this evening, just trickling into the mainland, so across parts of the Highlands. But elsewhere further south, it's a dry, fine, balmy summer's evening, leading into a largely clear night. Might just turn a little misty once more across parts of eastern England. Temperatures, well, in some rural spots across the north could dip down to single figures, but for most, it is a pretty warm night. It's going to be fairly difficult for sleeping once more, particularly staying warm well into the evening. And it's going to be another hot one tomorrow as well. Again, there will be thicker cloud across northern Scotland with some patchy rain, but I suspect the Highlands and the Western Isles will be drier and brighter than today, and a touch warmer too. There will be some mist and low cloud just clinging to parts of the coast across the northeast, and it will be cooler by the sea here, but elsewhere it's going to be hotter than today. 34, 35 likely across parts of the south. We might even hit 36 Celsius. During Friday evening, again, it's a balmy summer's evening, staying quite murky across the coasts of the northeast. A bit more of that low cloud around as we head into Saturday. Still the thicker cloud in the far north with that weather front bringing a bit of patchy rain to Shetland. But again, for the majority, Saturday is another blue sky day with lots of hot sunshine and temperatures more widely into the low 30s and possibly up into the mid 30s once more across parts of the south, where again we're likely to top out at 35 or maybe 36 Celsius. Again, the coast in the northeast will be a little bit cooler. As for the outlook, well, we are looking at potentially a bit of a change. Hot and sunny on Sunday, but this low will bring some showers next week.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis,